Good morning, afternoon, evening, good night, whatever time zone you're in. Oh, I hope everybody's having a great day.
Thursday, it's Friday Eve.
Yeah, yeah. We're excited
Friday Eve, that doesn't really mean much when you work 7 days a week, but
No, it doesn't. But it's still, I mean, even if you have to work, it's still more exciting to be a weekend day than just like a Monday.
true,
So-
true.
Oh, smithereens, I like that. Here we go.
I love Baby Yoda.
I do too. I do too.
So we wanted to hop on and make sure that everybody was aware of some of our upcoming training that we've got going on here at Wild West Hack and Fest and Anti-Siphon training. We've got some good hack and cast as well. If you want to let people know, Velda, about what's coming up on the training schedule.
Sure, we do have some awesome stuff coming up. John is going to be doing an encore presentation here, March 16th through 19th. Active defense and cyber deception. I can never get it straight. I always want to say CDC instead of ADCD. Seems so backwards, but a great opportunity to follow up to this class. So if you're interested, hop on over there and make sure you register. We have a brand new class, and it's all sold out. So we're really super excited. It's the Red Team Getting Access with Michael Allen. So that one's coming up at the end of March. And also over the same date, we have the Advanced Network Threat Hunting with Chris Britton. And then I'm super excited about Jeremy and Amanda Berlin and Jeremy Mayo. They're doing a tabletop exercise over the dates of April 13th through the 16th, Security, Defense, and Detection, TTX. And that one has kind of drawn a lot of attention. Kind of a fun tabletop course. Of course, yesterday we hosted Matt Llewellyn with his ICS training, and we'll be running some courses with him. And then of course we have Mr. Strand again on the SOC course. So if you love what you got this week, please make sure you tell your friends and your colleagues.
Isn't the next one my cyber deception course?
It is.
Yeah. So
it is coming up mid-March.
Now, we have Agent Rasputin saying, I've tried to register for cyber deception repeatedly, but no one replies to my emails.
What?
Where are you sending it, sir? Because
I wonder if I wonder if it's the auto reply for the discount code.
It might be, I checked with D-Rock yesterday on that because somebody had said something that they didn't get the information for the free discount code, and he verified that it is working. So maybe it's going to your junk or spam folder. So check that.
And the other thing that you might want to check is, I don't know where you're coming from, but some of the GoToWebinar, some countries GoToWebinar gets a little bit tweaky on. You might want to try to use a VPN and pop through a different location, which has been one of the chronic problems for this class. Is we have people from various parts of the world, and some companies like GoToWebinar and even some of our web hosting providers just flat out block anything from certain countries, which is horse crap. But I don't have control over it, and I would change it if I could. So I apologize. So sometimes those VPNs work really, really well to just pop through as well. So.
And also, Agent Rasputin, if you want to direct message me, I can certainly give you the discount code for that.
Somebody, Game Changer, said I just registered for deception and it works.
Okay,
Yay.
good. That makes me feel better.
That's good news. That's good news. So anyway, if you like what's going on here this week, please tell your friends, your relatives, your acquaintances, your coworkers. about what you've learned, and please share the information with them. We love to help people. That's kind of what we're all about.
Yep.
So, we also have some awesome Hacking Cast coming up. Our schedule is starting to fill up. In fact, we've got a lot, and we're filling in around the dates that we currently have on the website, but we are starting to really load in our Hacking Casts, and we're trying to fill those up through June. The other thing is we have a Blue Team Roundup coming up on March 25th, and that will be way cool. So if you get a chance, go in and take a register. The Roundup is free. The Hacking Casts are free.
Now,
Someone
said that our Red Team class with Michael Allen is sold out, right?
That's correct.
Yes.
Wow. But Bo's cloud pen testing class is not. So these two things I'd see like kind of being very simpatico, right? So the Red Team class is initial access, it's spear phishing, it's recon, it's all of that. And Bo's is very much in the cloud pen testing. Can't get into that. I recommend taking Bo's class and moving into the Red Team class as well.
You know what? And that's really cool, John, because we also have, I think it's called Securing the Cloud. So we have Bo's Breaching the Cloud, and we have Securing the Cloud, which is coming up, which will be provided by Andrew Krug. And it's AWS, and he's kind of an expert on AWS.
Yes.
So we'll be putting that on the schedule for May.
And we're also working D-Rock and the rest of the team, once we're done transferring to Office 365, is going to have a class on securing Office 365 and Azure. So that'll go really well with Andrew's class as well. So we have a lot of classes coming up. And like I said, I'm sorry that we can't, I'm sorry that we can't make everything pay what you can. We just can't. It's just, we do have to keep the lights on. And these classes are what allow me to do this for you all. So that works too. Somebody was talking about Cybody Works. Critical infrastructure class is a bit expensive, but the reason why is you're actually getting some gear from the class as well. So it's fundamentally different than everything's just like, in the cloud or an electronic format, which we can send out through an S3 bucket. There's actual gear that he's going to send you in this class. So that does increase the cost of it as well. So.
And also I want to mention it's a 32-hour class versus just 16 hours.
Yep.
So there's part 1, part 2, and you get both parts.
So when you look at that, it almost lines up with the cost of our classes. It's only slightly more expensive than that because it is a longer course. So.
Right.
All right. Are we ready to get going?
Yep, it looks like it's 12. Geez.
All right, let's do it. So
have a great day for everybody.
Thanks, everyone. So everybody, I wanted to talk about something that came up yesterday in the discussions, and it's kind of a weird thing that's uncomfortable to talk about, but I do want to discuss it briefly with you. And I don't know why my video of myself is not centering properly. Oh, I don't have lights on. Hold on. To hell with it. We'll just leave them on. So some people were talking about downloading the videos, right? And there are ways that you can download the videos of this course. So we ask you politely to not do that. I know I can't stop you from doing that. I understand that there are ways technically for you to download it so you can watch it on like an airplane or someplace else. I get that. And we understand all of that. But and I also understand that we're kind of giving this class kind of away for free for some people. But when we're looking at these courses, there's a couple of different things. One, it's an intellectual property thing, and I don't want it to be necessarily a monetary type thing, but just keep in mind that we're doing everything in our power to make this as accessible to people as possible. And don't go downloading it and posting it all over the internet. I would greatly appreciate it if you didn't do that. And some people try to download it so they can share it with their coworkers. I'd also ask that you don't do that as well, knowing full well that I can't stop you. But the reason why I'm asking that is one of the things that is important about this class is the interaction, okay? It's one of those things for some classes where they put it in a can And there's nothing wrong with that. Like if you go to like Cybrary or even SANS on Demand, which is fantastic, and all these different things. One of the things that I've learned over the years with a lot of the courses that are canned and people just get the video and they go through it, people don't complete them. It's something like 20% or less of the people actually complete the courses if they just get it canned with a bunch of videos and they just watch it that way. And the magic of this, like me answering your questions and you all trying to make me laugh when I'm speaking and I'm watching the meme channel and you guys are doing funny things, that's special and it makes the class really good. And it's kind of the difference between going to a live conference and then going to a live concert and watching that concert on YouTube. So I'm sure that you have had times where people are like, oh my God, this concert was amazing. And then you watch it on YouTube and you're like, I don't get it. The energy isn't the same. So I say all of that because if you have people that you want to share this class with, have them register for it. Like we said, it's pay what you can, okay? So it's not like you're getting one over and you're stealing the class and John's an idiot. No, I'm doing this crap intentionally to try to make it as accessible as possible. And in order for it to work, a lot of it requires the interaction. And yes, this will be on the test as well. All right, so let's go through it and let's get started. Oh my gosh, I am in the wrong slide. We are all the way down. I believe we're at user and entity behavioral analytics, I think is where we're at, if I'm not mistaken. And here we are. Yes, that is where we are. All right, so let's kick this up. I hate to say it's an ethics test. Look, you paid for the class. If you download it, I don't want to say it's ethical. I don't want to say it's illegal. I'm just saying that downloaded video isn't as cool as this is. And I want people to experience it and ask me questions as well. This is the Barbra Streisand effect. I'm going to up that. Let's give that a thumbs up. I will agree with that. There you go. That's absolutely true. But I want to talk about it too. All right. So user and entity behavioral analytics. So remember, this entire class is built around the concept of what actually works. And I realize my camera is having trouble focusing. It does better with a little bit of light. There we go. So with user and entity behavioral analytics, as I said, this class is fundamentally built around what actually works at stopping pen testers and attackers breaking into computer systems, right? And one of the things I talk about quite a bit, and I didn't have the slide in this because I need to update the data, is if you look at standard SIM technology, like event log analysis technology, usually that technology is only about 1.4, 1.7% effective at detecting attacks. And that's horrible, right? If you look at Windows event logs and how Windows event logs actually work and all of these different things, it's really horrific how you run into these companies that spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, on event logging technology, and it doesn't detect anything. And if you actually know what's being logged, how logs work, and how SIMs work, it's not that big of a surprise because you're logging a ton of data. A lot of times that data has nothing to do with any relevance for any type of attack that any attacker will ever do. So it's garbage, right? We keep putting money at it because if you read a book, it says you should log. And you're like, okay, I log. What are you logging? How are you logging? Do you know what an attack actually looks like whenever a log is actually generated? And unfortunately, the vast majority of people would answer no to a whole bunch of those different questions. But with user and entity behavioral analytics, it's actually putting context around what the logs are saying. So if somebody were to change the security policy on a Windows system, you don't see a log that says that somebody changed the security policy on a system. Instead, you see that somebody invoked privileged use on the system, and then the system account changed the security policy. You have to tie these event logs together to actually tell the narrative and to tell the story. If you look at event logs for people accessing files, you're going to see logs where somebody tries to access a file share. There's going to be a Kerberos authentication request to validate that they have access to that particular resource. That may not mean that much, but if somebody's trying to access thousands of files very, very, very quickly, all of a sudden that context comes into play. And that's really where entity behavioral analytics comes into works, because it's not just looking for an event log 666. Oh my God, Satan's on our network. It's instead looking at the context of how a user is interacting with the network as well. So somebody said, can we still order the new shirts? I'm pretty sure that you still can as well out there. All right. So let's go ahead and let's jump in. So if we're looking at user and entity behavioral analytics and we're cross-referencing this to the MITRE ATT&CK technique matrix, all right, there's a large number of different techniques that can be discovered via UEBA. So if you look at this discovery column right here, you have account discovery, application window discovery, browser bookmark discovery, it would not detect. Domain trust discovery, it would detect. File and directory recovery, it would detect. Network service scanning, possibly. Network share discovery, it would detect. You can see that there's a ton of these different techniques that would be detected by actually looking at the Active Directory logs. So Mimikatz asked, isn't this already a feature of Active Directory? No, it's not. I know Microsoft is using advanced threat analytics and doing all kinds of really cool things, but as far as it being built in, not really. And that's not necessarily a problem per se of Active Directory, but it's a problem of how security tools interact with Active Directory logs as well. All right. So we have a number of these different techniques that are there for discovery, even credentialed access, and lateral movement inside of an organization that can actually be detected by UEBA. Now, a lot of people don't like UEBA. And the reason why is they look at it and they say, well, golly gee, oh, I missed it. Okay, sorry. Well, why? It's a why question. Why isn't that built into Active Directory? Who knows? We're going to get into Windows logs and how they're kind of train wrecks. And we're going to see how Microsoft is fixing that with Sysmon here in a little bit. So we will be getting to that here in a moment. So, all right. So yes, with UEBA, there's a large number of different types of attack tactics and techniques that can be detected. And a lot of my testers hate it. Like whenever they get in and somebody's running UEBA, we can bypass it, but it makes us slow way down in order to be effective in actually moving around in that environment. Because a lot of these rules are timing based. You know, how many attempted login attempts from one workstation to other workstations within 5 minutes happen? You have to actually understand those windows, and then you can actually set your attack to go through that as well. Yep, user entity behavioral analytics as well. And I would agree with Tester 6120. Yeah, Defender, ATP, Sysmon, there is a tremendous amount of things that Microsoft is doing really, really well in this space right now. So you shouldn't just be ripping on Microsoft, oh, security is a train wreck. There's no major company in the world that does large scale security better than Microsoft. And I know that for many of you that seems anathema, you're like, well, Windows systems are getting exploited all the time. There's not a lot of remote exploits for Windows computer systems. They don't come out all the time like they did in like 2007 or 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They got really good really quickly. Now there's things that Microsoft sucks at. UI design is one of them, but that's a whole nother conversation to have. Now, when we're looking at logs, right, they are a train wreck. So if you just look at Active Directory logs or you look at standard event logs that are happening on a Windows computer system, there's no such thing as a log that says, you know, oh, well, you've been hacked. It just doesn't happen, right? That 666 event log just doesn't exist. And they don't tend to log useful data for security. It's like they, you know, hired a crazed, crack-addled monkey to write their event logging system for security, and they really didn't give them any context other than security, go. And they taught them nothing about security. So you have this monkey that's banging on the keyboard, screaming, throwing poop at the walls, because monkeys are going to do what monkeys are going to do. By the way, I'm terrified of monkeys. So it's just this train wreck for event logs. Now, if you look at a lot of tests that we do, less than 5% are actually from the logs. So here's a question, and I'll ask this question a couple of times because I want to drive it home in this course. What percentage of your event logs that your organization logs actually have a rule, alert, or a detect associated with that event log? Now, For many organizations, it's less than 5%. So that means if you're logging all of these logs, say that you're logging a terabyte of logs a day, less than 5% of those logs actually have rules or alerts written for them. So the vast majority of them, you're just storing. You're just basically storing them. Boy, there's a lot of zeros there. So yeah, if you have an event log system, usually you're looking at less than 5% of the event logs have any rules or any alerts associated with that specific event log. Now, if you talk to a SIEM vendor, they'll tell you, yeah, but you might need those logs. And if you get hacked, you would rather have those logs than not have those logs. And once again, the lizard brain in part here is like, yes, that sounds good to me. They're using ignorance, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And ignorance in the best possible definition of the word, which is using our lack of understanding against us in this industry to get us to log more, always more. Log everything, let ArcSight sort it out, right? Log absolutely everything. Now, for many of these vendors, when you're talking about ArcSight or Splunk, what is many vendors' pricing model based on? How do many of these vendors actually set up their pricing model? It's based on the amount that you log, right? So you have all of this where you have logging. The vendors are telling you to log everything, and their pricing model is built on the amount that you log. So do you see a problem? We can do better, right? We can, in fact, do better, right? And some people, they log by events per second, right? The number of events per second that are coming in. That means nothing to me. Whenever I talk to companies and they're like, we're logging about 500, 600 to 1,000 to 2,000 events per second. Are they useful? If not, why are you doing it? So that is one of the things, kind of about this class that I think is important is we built this class around what the SOC analysis class, around what I need SOC analysts to understand. When we built the Security Operations Center for BHIS for our customers, we always come back to the core question. If we're logging something, does it actually further us in a forensics investigation, or does it actually aid us in detection of an actual attack? If not, I'm not going to log it. I'm not going to log everything and let God sort it out, right? That's just not something that we're going to do. Now, Hammer brought up a great question. How do we know what logs are the most critical ones to log, right? We're going to get to that, right? But it ultimately boils down to a core concept of actually understanding what attacks look like and what logs are generated by those logs. So here in a bit, I'm going to talk about adversarial emulation, which is going to be a huge part of answering that question, where we can actually utilize tools like Atomic Red Team to emulate what attackers do on systems. And then we can see our detective capabilities to detect those attacks, and we can tune accordingly in our organizations as well. All right, so that's kind of where we're heading through, right? So that's where we're actually going through. All right, so one of the sites that you can go to is JP-Cert. They have this great website called JP-Cert Tools Analysis, and you can Google this and it'll take you right to JP-Cert. Or you can go to Bing and they're gonna take you to Skin Hand Cream Products, I guess. I don't know what Bing's gonna take you to. It's your call. So you can look at JP-Cert, and instead of actually focusing on very, very specific tools, they actually utilized a bunch of the protocols and utilities that are built into Windows that tools use. For example, WMIC, Windows Management Instrumentation Command, PsExec, Scheduled Tasks, Windows RM, Bits, and it says these are the event logs and Sysmon event logs that are actually generating what it is that they can do. So somebody brought up Splunk. Splunk does a good job at what it does if you purchase everything for Splunk. And you actually have the user and entity behavioral analytics modules enabled on it. If you're not using UEBA and you're running Splunk, Splunk is as much garbage as any other product that's out there. You have to have the UEBA models from here on out. You absolutely have to as well. So JP-Cert is great, and it's kind of setting this up. And this is something we should be doing in our environments regularly, right? We should be running emulation software, making sure our detective capabilities are functioning properly, identifying gaps, and then actually remediating those gaps as well, It's absolutely key. So why UEBA? Because it's looking at behavior. It's not looking at a specific event log and saying this event log means that this particular system was attacked. That's not what it's actually doing. Instead, it's looking at the behavior of a user account. It's looking at the behavior of a system account, and then it's basically alerting whenever certain clipping thresholds actually happen on that as well. So we reflect this back into the logs, but it's actually reflected across multiple logs and providing context. So an example would be, it can require Active Directory, Exchange, OA, and even IIS logs to tell the entire story of what actually happened with a particular user account as well. And yes, it can involve tuning. Absolutely. An example would be an internal password spray. If we look at an internal password spray, how would we actually go about detecting that? So I want to show you one of our webcasts that we did a while ago. So let's go to, what was the name of it? Zero to Hero. We did a webcast series called Attack Tactics, all right? Now in Attack Tactics, we actually went through how an actual attack works, right? So if I go to about here, what are we doing? Oh wait, no, I gotta go to the actual, I gotta view it on YouTube. Then I go down to the bottom. Let me give you all a link to this. There we go. So if you look down here, it actually went through, oh, Zoom doesn't work for y'all on this. So if you look down here, we have infrastructure and background, overview, start of the attack, gaining access, password spraying toolkit, lateral movement, all these different things. And then if you go to Attack Tactics 6, Attack Tactics 6 goes through the logging and the analysis to actually detect these types of attacks as well. Our active defense core seats limited, it's limited, I think, to 3,000, and we're nowhere near 3,000 division by zero. If you can't register, let me know, because I want to get you guys in there as well. But yeah, and that is actually the GoToWebinar limit, and it also is a limit for me. I can't handle my students whenever I get over 3,000 students. For like the questions on Discord, once I get above 3,000, it gets to the point where they're happening so fast, it's almost impossible for me to pick them out and answer them. And this class is about 1,500, which feels like a really good pace. So, all right. So in this particular this webcast, we go through the actual approach of an attacker from the outside of an organization all the way to getting domain administrator within that organization. So we actually have parts of the webcast where we use Mail Sniper to gain initial access to that environment. So you can see like what an external password spray looks like over here, right? So on the right-hand side, you can see all of these user accounts and which user accounts actually worked for actually gaining access to that remote environment. And then also the lateral movement aspect of it. If we look at, let's go to, oh, here it is, NTLM Relay X at 34 minutes. And what it looks like whenever somebody runs Responder plus NTLM Relay X to do poisoned answers and gain access to a large number of different computer systems. Now, the reason why we go through this, and we've gotten very close to getting kicked off of Google a number of times. Ebenesium, if you want some tips on teaching 3,000 people, ping me. It is a lot of people. It's weird. I went from teaching 100 people per class live to teaching thousands and doing webcasts, but 3,000 people is a lot. You're absolutely right. It is a lot of people. So here we go, running NTLM Relay X. You're going to see it go and then basically authenticate to tons of different computer systems very, very quickly, or Responder feeds it in. So if this all sounds like gobbledygook, I want to show you what an attack looks like and explain why this lateral movement detection is so important. So if we look on the left-hand side, the attacker's computer system is authenticating to multiple computer systems, and it's dumping the password hashes off of those computer systems. And you're going to see it go faster. And anytime it says succeeded, 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 this one machine has authenticated to a whole bunch of those different computer systems, right? Now here's the deal. If you were looking at just straight event logs, you would see an authentication attempt from one workstation to another workstation, and that would be it. However, if you're running user and entity behavioral analytics and you have a machine that's trying to authenticate to thousands of computer systems, then that is absolutely something that you need to be able to detect in an environment. So this is a great series, if you want to check it out, to kind of walk through what the different attack tactics look like for a real pen test and a real attacker. But when we get to the logging section, we're going to talk about logs in this class. Turning on the Windows event logs to get what you need to detect these attacks is not out of the box. We actually go through what you have to do to enable logging properly to be able to detect these attacks, and it requires fundamentally changing the default logging settings on many of your Windows computer systems in your environment. So that is frustrating, right? Because out of the box, it doesn't work. And this goes back to our SIM vendors. A lot of SIM vendors are like, log everything, we'll sort it out, but they don't give guidance, or many of their customers don't follow the guidance to configure the logs properly to actually detect the appropriate attacks in an environment as well. So what exactly does lateral movement look like? This is another free tool from JPCert called Logon Tracer. And what Logon Tracer does is it'll look at the event logs. It only looks at 6 different event logs, and it's able to identify that this particular service right here, this user account called Service White Noise, is authenticated to every single one of these green diamonds. So it kind of helps for people that are colorblind. These are workstations that this particular user account has actually logged into. So Ebenezium, not pinging me right now, but send me an email and I can talk about some of my tips for making things work, but we'll get to that as well. So with this, so we got a question, is it possible to practice this attack on the VMs? No, actually, this is actually an attack against a full Active Directory environment, the video that I just showed you. So we have the logs. I have some of the logs that I provided to you, and we're actually going to use some of those logs and some analysis here in a little bit as well. Can you share a document that is required to log which are the right events? We will absolutely be doing that. We're going to talk about PowerShell logging. We're going to talk about command line logging on Windows computer systems in Sysmon. Those are going to be the most powerful logs that you can actually get in your environment as well. So Delta Bravo, what about logs other than Microsoft Windows, Linux, routers, firewalls, application servers? Specifically the application server logs, those are very, very powerful logs that you would have in your environment. A lot of your routers and firewalls, if they're collecting NetFlow, you're doing really, really well. If you can collect those types of logs off of those systems as well. So Logon Tracer versus Bloodhound. This would be like what Bloodhound would look like in Logon Tracer. So Bloodhound would basically do lateral movement, try to authenticate to a whole bunch of different computer systems, and something like Logon Tracer would be able to map that out and show it to you as well. All right, so let's go through. All right, so false positives, not a thing, folks. I'm sorry, this is a bit controversial. All right, so a bit controversial. There's like some controversial things that I've said over the past few years. Last year, 2020, the most controversial thing I said at the beginning of the year was I basically said, hey guys, wash your damn hands. I got frustrated. I was in a bathroom at an airport, and like probably 25% of the dudes washed their hands when they were done going to the bathroom. Made me freaking livid, because that's crap that you learn in kindergarten. And that turned into a controversial thing. There was a whole bunch of people online. They're like, well, my hands and various parts of my anatomy are cleaner than anything else. No. Oh, I bathe regularly. I don't have to wash my hands. No. Like, did you fail kindergarten? Wash your damn hands, right? And that blew up. Like, there was tons of people. I had one guy that said he was going to kill me, which I thought was like, that escalated quickly. Still, if you're listening, not successful, by the way, not successful. You know, we told you in kindergarten to wash your hands. We also told you to not be a liar. Bring it. All right. So what I said that was controversial this year is I said the Mac OS X interface isn't as good as Windows and Linux, most Linux desktops. Boy, did that really anger and enrage the Apple fanboys. And I have been one for years. So that's controversial things coming from John Strand. Like, why would you do that, right? Now, the most controversial thing I say in security is if you're using UEBA and you got false positives, that's not a thing. And people freak out. They're like, well, my UEBA, there's tons of alerts happening all the time and they're not attacks. No, you need to change your thinking. It's not that it's a false positive, it's a tuning opportunity. It's all about definitions and making sure that we do these things correctly, right? It's a tuning opportunity. Because look, this gets into me being old, right? So years ago, whenever we did log analysis, here's how log analysis worked. You would have something like syslog, and all the logs would log to a centralized syslogging server, and it would be the equivalent of a big log, like flat file. Then you would write a Perl script, because I am that old. You would write a Perl script that would go through, pull out specific event logs, put those into other files, do counts on those files, alert if those counts got over a certain threshold, and then you would be left with a bunch of event logs, and you go through those event logs, and then you would basically filter out the event logs that weren't interesting to you, and you were constantly updating your bash or your Perl scripts. And that's what we did all damn day. Now, you come to today, and I have companies that I've worked with where they set up UEBA and they're like, look at this. Look at this. There's like 250 alerts. That's way too many false positives for my team. 250? Sit down and go through them. If you go through those, a lot of those 250, hell, even 1,000. If you set up a UEBA system and you get 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 alerts, go through and tune them. Go through and say, this is a service account, ignore it. This is a backup account, ignore it. This is an administrator who logs into about 25 systems a day. We're gonna set his or her threshold to 30 systems. To do 1,000, 2,000 alerts from a UEBA to tune it, you're talking maybe a couple of days of actual work. So these are tuning opportunities. And I know that this is hard for people to hear because it's like, well, crap, can't the magic box just tell me if we've been hacked? Doesn't work that way. That's just how these things work, right? No one could, Burnham said, Breman said, no one can read Perl anymore. No one could ever read Perl. It was a write-only language, folks. So with this, we're really trying to boil this down. Hello, kitty. Hi, cat. See if I can get the cat to attack the screen. All right, so it goes back to tuning, and this is literally our job, all right? This is literally our job, and I like that. I didn't realize there was gonna be work involved for doing cyber, right? So yes, this is literally what we're supposed to do, and it makes you better at your job. And a tremendous amount of security is just understanding your systems, all right? It's just understanding your systems and how they work. And it still blows my mind when we do pen tests. A lot of the companies that we test are like, yeah, we found this Server 2003 box over here. And they're like, what? What does that system do? I always have this little bit of dread in me when we bring that up whenever a customer's like, what does that computer do? It's like, you should know. Here, I'll give you like a battle story. One of the worst pen tests we have ever had, bar none. So we had this company that we were testing, and they had offices based in Hong Kong, New York, Tokyo, and I want to say Singapore and somewhere in Australia. And they only had about 300 IP addresses, right? So they hire us in, we sent a server, they want us to do a vulnerability scan, which we hate doing, by the way. Absolutely hate doing vulnerability assessments. It's just not fun. Like pen tests are where it's at, finding new things, running a scan that somebody else can do for like $1,500 is rough, but they wanted us to do that before we got started. And I'm thankful that they had us do that before we got started. So we set up the server, and I kid you not, like we had to send them instructions on how to power the system on, how to plug in the power, how to put in the Ethernet jack. And through the entire thing, they were ripping on us. They're like, oh, these instructions are horrible. You guys are bad at IT. What are you doing? And I'm like, this is really, really bizarre. They're very mean. I don't like working with mean customers. And I said, could you please give me the IP address so we can VPN and then we can connect to that server? And I gave them the commands. You log in with this user ID, this password, type ifconfig, give me the IP address. And they're beating me up, right? Constantly. It's like, well, our technical people said that your instructions sucked. And I'm like, I literally gave you instructions to plug it into an outlet, plug in the Ethernet port, power on the computer, and then run this command. They're fighting me. Finally, they give me the IP address of the computer system. And I kid you not, they gave me the IP address as 127.0.0.1. That's when you know you're going to have a bad day. For those of you that don't know, 127.0.0.1 is the IP address of your local loopback interface. All of your computer systems have an IP address of 127.0.0.1. It is not a remotely accessible IP address. So at any rate, and by the way, the IT people we were working with were subcontractors. They were not the actual customer that was paying us. So they were IT subcontractors, which should have been a sign right there. So Joff was doing this test, and I was teaching in San Diego at the time. And Joff ran the scan of the entire environment, and he contacted me and he goes, dude, how many IP addresses did they say that they had in the ranges they gave us? And I said, they expected they only had about 380 IP addresses. Okay, yeah. I just finished the scan and there's 4,000 live IP addresses. I'm like, well, that's very strange. So we started looking at the scan results, and we found a bunch of servers that the entire web page was in Russian. We saw a whole bunch of servers that were for a manufacturing company. This wasn't a manufacturing company. We went to the customer, we said, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, you said you had about 308 or 380 systems. We found 4,000. This looks really bad. What the hell is going on? The IT subcontractor came to us and said, yeah, well, we do IT for a number of customers all over the world. Our entire network for all of our customers is flat. So it wasn't just our customers' network we were scanning in that IP range. It was all of the customers for this IT support company. And there was no firewalling, there was no segmentation, there was nothing. And when we pushed back and said, no, bad IT infrastructure company, they said, well, how about this? How about you just exploit the computer systems, find out what they are, and then let us know what we own in that space, because the IP addresses were all jumbled. They had no idea what their infrastructure was. They had no idea what their IP addresses were. They had no idea what their services were. Now, when you're dealing with false positives, you're dealing with IT security. Once again, it's all about knowing your network. It always comes back to that every single time. So how exactly does user and entity behavioral analysis work? Well, it can run in a number of different ways. Sometimes it'll work with decision trees. The way a decision tree works is, imagine you've got Plinko and you have a series of events that actually occur. And those series of events, if you were to drop little Plinko things, it would actually have a distribution of a standard distribution in the game of Plinko, right? So if it's going Plinko, 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 and then all of a sudden something's way the hell off over here, that's weird, that shouldn't happen, that would be an outlier. So your decision trees identify how things are supposed to go and how they usually go, learns those pathways, this event begat this event, this user ID logs into these 4 systems, learns the pattern, and whenever something breaks out of that pattern, it alerts on it, right? Bayesian. How Bayesian decisions and analysis work is the way that I love the best description of Bayesian is, how do you understand something if you don't have context with anything else? So imagine you are sitting at a table backwards. The table's behind me, okay? And I take a ball or a crumpled piece of paper right here, and I throw it behind me, right? And then it lands. Now, I don't know where that ball landed on that table behind me. I have no idea. But then I take another ball and I throw that ball behind me, and it lands somewhere else on the table, and I learn the relationship between those 2 balls that landed on that table. And I keep doing this, right? The more balls I throw, and the more it describes the relationship of where those balls are, the more accurately I can identify where the balls are, and I can identify what is normal for those balls. I will never know their accurate position in what is quote unquote normal, but the more data I collect, the closer I get. So we can use that Bayesian inference to be able to do that. The most common way that a lot of these tools actually work is stacking analysis. It's funny, for all these tools talking about artificial intelligence, usually what they're doing is just like, screw it, stack it. And stacking works really well. So I want you to think of a system that a user logs into. When that user logs into that system, as soon as they log into that system, they get a +1 because they're logged in. Now, if the user logs off, they get a -1, right? So they go to 0. Now, if you set a threshold for your user accounts, let's say 6, okay? If we have 6, and that user now logs into 1,000 systems or 2,000 computer systems, say using a tool like Bloodhound, now they got a score of 2,000 authentication attempts. That would be a stacked analysis. They also call this frequency analysis. So instead of actually trying to look at each individual event log and learning what is normal for those specific events, you can do this much faster and simpler by doing a stacked analysis and identifying clipping thresholds for those user accounts as well. So I didn't want to go into like too much on artificial intelligence and things like that. And many people say it's just a bunch of if then else statements, and that's true because everything has if then else statements, but a lot of the math is a lot more interesting than that. But the stacking analysis is what a tremendous amount of products actually do. All right, that's just how they actually work. Now with the AI, that learning, it goes back into Bayesian inference. It goes into the decision trees where it learns how Bob logs into systems, and it learns these event logs and how these event logs usually relate to each other. All right. Now there's some artificial intelligence endpoint security products. One of them is SentinelOne. There's going to be a lot of drinking if we're drinking on AI. But what SentinelOne does is instead of trying to make a determination as to oversimplification, oh my God. Of course it's an oversimplification. It's not an artificial intelligence course, right? We're just trying to get in the rough general area like Bayesian inference. All right. So with AI, we're trying to learn what are the event logs that are usually done on that system. What are the files that are usually accessed for that computer system? And then you're basically building a profile for each user ID in those contexts of those user accounts. Now, this is more difficult because doing this requires more CPU, it requires more memory, requires more disk space, and it's only as good as the data you feed it. The more data you feed the system, the more the system learns what is normal pathways. And that is one of the key components of any artificial intelligence algorithm. What a lot of people don't understand is with artificial intelligence, it's not that the algorithm automatically does stuff. It's just you feed a lot of data and then the algorithm learns patterns over time, all right? So that's what we're actually doing here as well. Now, one of the things I absolutely love, is Insider Threat Management System an okay option if you don't have UEBA? It depends on the system. Some of those insider threat management systems are actually user and entity behavioral analytics, just with a different name, all right? So with all of this stuff, what about SentinelOne? Sorry, the guy threw me off. Thank you very much, Mark on Web. So what SentinelOne does, instead of looking at a specific executable and saying this executable good, this executable bad, what it does, it looks at what that executable does. So if that executable fires, and then it spawns off a network connection to the outside of the internet, and then it spawns off another network connection to the inside of the network, bang, flag it, it shouldn't do that. If that executable fires and invokes cmd.exe, and then cmd invokes net commands, bang, flag it. So it's trying to get better at learning what are the normal pathways that run DLL32 and PowerShell would do in an environment, and as soon as it goes outside of the established parameters, it freaks out, okay? So that's just some different ways that you can look at it as well. Any opinion on binary defense systems? Binary defense rocks, and I want to tell you why. So Dave Kennedy is like a brother from another mother to me. And I know that that's like name dropping, but I apologize for that profusely, but trust me, I love Dave. And I want to give you an example of why binary defense does a really, really good job. First and foremost, Binary Defense actually incorporates active defense components in its Vision product. And like if you try to Mimikatz on a system, it'll give you fake credentials. If you try to do Kerberoasting, it'll lie to you. That's actually built into Binary Defense's endpoint agent, which is wicked cool. The other thing that I like about Binary Defense is they react quickly. So this is a story that I can now tell. We were actually testing Binary Defense, and we actually pulled down the entire agent code, reverse engineered the code, got to the source code, and we were able to reverse engineer the entire thing, break it, and we were able to do cross-site scripting to gain access to the Central Management Council. Now that doesn't sound good for Binary Defense, right? I just said, hey, we were able to break it in a whole bunch of different ways, but that's not the point of the story. Almost every tool that you look at is going to have weaknesses and vulnerabilities. The true test of a product in a company is how quickly they remediate those issues. And Dave Kennedy and his company were able to remediate both of those issues within 45 minutes of us discovering those issues, and they were able to have a fix pushed out to every single one of their customers. So that's one of the reasons why I love Binary Defense as well. So there you go. So InfoSight, I've never worked with InfoSight. I apologize for that as well. How do UEBA work on Linux? So whenever you're looking at Linux systems, you would have to actually have your Linux systems tied in via like PAM, pluggable authentication modules, into your Active Directory environment. So the authentication for your Linux systems also tie into Active Directory, and then your UEBA would work just fine as well. So like I said, really, really cool stuff. So now my question is, where do you get your logs? Okay, we're going to pull them. We're going to pull all of them, right? We're going to pull them from systems, servers, and services. We're going to get them everywhere. Network logs, log. But getting the right logs is a pain, and this requires us to drill. And this is why that adversarial simulation is so important. So UBA is user behavioral analytics, generally focuses on user accounts. UEBA also looks at machines and services as well. So it's slight variation on the name as well. LDAP is Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. So it's a way that you can actually create a directory of all of your users and your accounts in your environment, and it can be stored in a lookup directory. Think of a very large phone book that's hierarchical, or a file system. You have user accounts broken into groups and different services and OUs. If you look at what Active Directory is LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. And then you also have Kerberos for tickets and authentication to multiple resources on the network. And Microsoft ties those things together as well. All right. Woo, keep the questions coming. Awesome. It's going great. All right, so let's keep going. Active Directory logs. So if we look at our Active Directory logs, simply going through and just logging and expecting a log to jump out and say that you've been hacked is not going to happen. It never has happened, it never will happen. It's like 1.7% effective, right? But UEBA can be your friend, right? Now, what's tough about this is it's almost, actually, I'm just going to say it's impossible to do good event logging in Active Directory unless you have user and entity behavioral analytics. It just is. Because you're always going to have to find context, because Active Directory is a log here and a log here and a log here and a log here, tells the story of what happened with this machine account. You need to tie a lot of things together as well. So Logon Tracer, we talked about it. It actually logs this stuff. It logs this stuff and it does a really good job, other than the fact that it's slow. It's not the fastest thing in the world. If you're going to run through this, right? If you're going to set this up, you have to set it up on a system with multiple CPU cores and a crap ton of memory. Like we're talking at least 32 gigs. If you're going to run it on any moderate size Active Directory environment, it is not quick. So we're going to share some other tools like Deep Blue CLI that does a much better job of just parsing the event logs and doing context of the specific event IDs as they roll in. All right. So one of the things I like is it shows you who are the top logged in user accounts on your environment and what workstations are logged in to the most hosts. All right. So if you look, we have this administrator account is logged into the most systems. We have all these other user accounts, which I'm not going to try to pronounce. Nihongo totomo muzikashi desu ne. And then we have the workstations on the right-hand side that have authenticated to the most other computer systems as well. All right. All right, so the other thing I like about Login Tracer is it shows you a heat map of when these authentications or when these events occurred for these specific user IDs. This can be effective for you in identifying a timeline of when an attack occurred and when somebody actually went through and started their attack and started moving laterally in their environment as well. So here you go. You have, excuse me, you had Naha Okinawa. It basically authenticated to 20 systems at 1400 hours, 0 at 1500, then 2, and then 0. So you can see how it starts, and then it basically kind of long tails it out with color coding as well. Oh no, what are we, my Japanese proficiency? What are we gonna do? Higanari, Miganari, Korisori, Dore, all of these different things. Yeah, I love Japanese. I suck at it unless I get drunk. So I went over and spent a lot of time in Japan and taught over there a bunch of times. And me and the students, whenever we went out and did karaoke and went and did Japanese steakhouses, that I could actually speak pretty well when I was drunk. So every single night they would take me out, they would give me a whole bunch of sake, we'd have a really, really good time. And like the next day I couldn't remember a damn thing that I actually said, which is fun. But yeah, I don't drink anymore. So I probably would suck at Japanese pretty bad. I'm not drunk, I'm just confident. I think that there's that block whenever you're trying to speak in a language where you're embarrassed about sucking at speaking the language. And when you're drinking, you just don't care. The inhibitions go down and it makes it easier to speak as well. All right, so Deep Blue CLI is a little bit better for tactical UEBA. Now this is created by Eric Conrad, who is one of the most fantastic SANS instructors you will ever encounter in your life. If you're gonna take a SANS class, I recommend taking a SANS class from somebody like Tim Medine. I recommend taking a SANS class from someone like Eric Conrad. I'd recommend taking a SANS class from Seth Meisner, Bryce Galbraith. I'd recommend taking classes from these people because they actually do work in the fields that they're actually teaching. It's absolutely amazing what they do. And he wrote this tool, Deep Blue CLI, which is a PowerShell environment. You can feed it in event logs and it'll basically do analysis on those event logs, and it can identify user creation, added, password guessing, password spraying, Bloodhound usage, command line PowerShell auditing, regular expression searches, obfuscated commands. We're going to go through this, all of these different types of things you're going to see show up in the lab that comes up here in a little bit. But it does require you to have PowerShell logging. It does require you to have Sysmon enabled if you're going to use Deep White CLI to basically do analysis as well. So just absolutely amazing tool, and it's very effective. Now, with Deep White CLI, he released a new tool that does threat hunting via Sysmon. All right, so hold on. Now that I'm hated at my job, when I bring up topics like logging, Sysmon, Rita, UEBA, they don't want to do any of that. I guess I'm going to start looking for a new job soon. But you know what's cool? And I hope that this works, right? You take this class, you understand the things that actually do work. And don't ever go into a job interview or say, because John Strand said so, because that doesn't work, right? Because what they're going to do is they're going to Google John Strand. They're going to find a male model that was part of the insurrection in the Capitol who's currently in prison. And they're going to ask you, why are you taking advice from a guy that doesn't even know how to wear underwear? By the way, Google John Strand image search, good luck. Some of it gets a bit racy, but it's clear the dude doesn't know how to wear pants. No one's going to listen to you. So, you know, this will start, but I'm hoping if you can do these things, then you can take like the ACT certification, which is inexpensive, and you can actually prove that you have these skills as well. All right. So with Sysmon, basically Eric Conrad took the idea of Deep Blue CLI and took it up a couple of notches with Deep White CLI. That has, people are like, what? Just Google image search me, which is a horrible thing to say, but you'll get it very quickly. I'm not living a double life. It's someone completely different. I don't know. Those of you that were in the last class, Chris Young, should I do the John Strand versus John Strand presentation? Like the difference between John Strand male model? Maybe I'll do that later, just so people know the difference between us as well. All right. So Sysmon gives us a lot more detail and fidelity, and you're going to see that in a lab here in a little bit where we're going to talk about Sysmon and what it actually does. So here's some really cool ones. You can take Deep Blue CLI, and some of the things that I love is this one says that this particular SID account, this user account, has logged in 22,451 times. That's crazy. So the Lab V2 DC1 logged in 22,000 times. And then we have Bertha. Bertha logged in 75 times. The administrator account logged in 29 times. It's time for us to start doing some research on exactly what the hell is going on with those user accounts. And this is actually pretty fast. Go to webinar adds 10 pounds. Damn, that's nice of you to say. Appreciate it. All right, so here we go. All right, so if we actually dig in on these user accounts, we can actually find like Bertha Shorts. We can get an idea of what machine she's logging in from and what event ID was generated from those particular systems and the time frame around those login as well. All right, Deep White CLI, as I said, is associated with Sysmon. Now, one of the cool things about Sysmon is Sysmon in event ID 1 will actually give you the hash of the executable that fired. So what Deep White CLI can do is it can automatically go through and do a hash lookup for every single like executable hash that fires. And then it can check it with VirusTotal and say, is this malware? No. Is this malware? No. Is this malware? No. And it'll basically do that kind of antivirus checking on the fly, which is very, very, very powerful to detect things on environments. Logon anomalies, logon tracer screen again. Yeah, Deep Blue CLI can detect this too. It can detect that password spraying attack. It can also detect whenever the user has authenticated successfully to these different systems as well. All right, so I had a question. I thought I had a question up earlier. Some people said Bing my search. I don't know what the hell you're gonna come up with that. So some people were asking, what are some event IDs that are important, right? So the most important event IDs are the event IDs that deal with login, log off, right? If you're just only getting one set of event IDs, that 4624 and that 4634 are absolutely critical because it's gonna track that log on, log off. So if an attacker is moving laterally from multiple systems, from one system to another, to another, to another, we want to be able to detect that. And that's that stacked analysis, right? That gets us into that overall stacked analysis. ACL object access audit required. That requires us to actually have object access auditing enabled. And we can actually put that on certain sensitive critical files or honey files in environments. Process launch and usage. Tasking XML account lockout with the source IP address. If you look, we need 2 logs to be able to tell us the account has been locked out and what is the source IP address as well. You can get the firewall logs, but the firewall logs are horrible on a Windows computer system. They're really, really, really bad. They just don't work very well. For Deep White CLI and Deep Blue CLI inked with stars, we're going to be doing a lab with this here in just a couple of seconds, all right? So Kerber roasting, we can detect that with 4769 and 4771 as well. So, all right, so SIM and percentages. So we played this game earlier and I want to reiterate it, right? Because I think sometimes when you're looking at chiasms, repeating these themes multiple times becomes really important from a pedagogical perspective to be able to learn it. So we go back to that game. How much do you log? What do you log from? And who tells you what to log and what percentage of your logs have alerts or signatures written for them? Turns out very few. Well, these logs will generate a lot of event logs. They absolutely will generate a tremendous number of event logs. We don't have to log everything, right? And this gives us some context as well as far as what we're actually going to get. All right. So command line logging. So give you an idea just kind of what a nightmare is on a Microsoft Windows box. If you want to go through and enable command line logging, I've given you the instructions here to do it. But you're basically like, you must have audit process creation enabled. You must enable audit policy to include command line and process creation events. Then you use the advanced audit policy configuration. You need to confirm that these settings are set up. Then you're going to set the max log file to be something larger than default size. Then you're going to go through and you're going to set up admin, template, system, audit, process creation, policies, Windows, security, advanced audit policies, detailed tracking. And then if you actually go through the second setting, it's actually going to be overwritten. You're going to have to reset it after you actually get it running. Then you're going to have to go through and you're going to have to set up the third setting to avoid overwriting advanced audit setting to make sure that it doesn't overwrite the second setting. If this seems crazy, I'm not going through this quickly, like you have to write this down and say, yes, this is going to be on the test. No, I'm intending to show you this because it's freaking hard. It's not easy. It's not just one setting that you hit. And it's like, yeah, I'd like to enable command line logging. Boop. And then it's running. It's almost like Microsoft is actively working against you to actually get the logs that we need off the command line that are actually effective for us to detect attacks in our environment. So yeah, if your head is just, yeah, don't worry. That's the point of these couple of slides. It sucks. Then when it is working, it's magic. Right? You actually see that somebody ran the net command. Specifically what they ran was net user / domain. Boom, we've got a detection on it, right? So that's great. For PowerShell logging, all right, you can run all of these different commands. We got Windows Event Util. We're going to set the PowerShell. We're going to list out the configuration. Then we're going to set all of these different settings and hopefully it works. Or you can just have one PowerShell script that does all of this for you. But then you have PowerShell logging. That's awesome, right? So now you can see that somebody actually fired up Bloodhound on this computer system. That's useful. It's really great. Or we could do Sysmon. Sysmon is like easy, like 10 seconds easy. So we run Sysmon, we do sysmon.exe, except EULA, and we're going to install a sysmon config.xml file. You could use the one from Swift on Security. You could use modular Sysmon from Hartog. These are great options, and it takes 10 seconds to run. What does it give you? Well, it gives you a different event log, and it gives you this. And this is magic. So here we have an event ID 1, and I want you to see what this syslog log gives us. It says the image is sec504 downloads msf.exe. The actual file version was 2.214. The original file name was AB for the Apache Workbench software, but it was renamed to msf.exe. We see the user that executed that. We see the hash associated or hashes associated with that. We get the parent process ID that spawned this particular executable, and we see that the parent process ID that it spawned it was chrome.exe. So from one log, we can say this particular service was kicked off by chrome.exe. So the user downloaded msf.exe and ran it, and here's the hash associated with it as well. So that's powerful. So now it's time for a 10-minute break. So let's go ahead, let's do that 10-minute break. And then when we come back, we're gonna jump in very quickly into some labs where you get to play with Sysmon, where you get to see what these attacks actually look like in Sysmon. All right, let's sally forth. Right, so with Sysmon, it's super easy to get it set up on an individual system, but it's actually pretty easy to push out through group policy. And there's a number of articles out there, but one of the first that I saw that was pretty solid was this one from SysPanda. That's basically this little script that you can basically import. And what it requires you to do is actually put the Sysmon executable on a file share that's accessible for all the workstations. And then whenever they run, they can run it all from one communal share. So you don't have to install Sysmon on every single system. You have it in this situation, the domain.com app sysmon.exe with the proper configs to have it run as well. WinLogBeat rather, is from Elastic. And what is really cool about WinLogBeat is you can actually configure it to actually pull your event logs and send it to an Elastic instance, an Elasticsearch database. So it can actually read through the configuration to pull the Sysmon logs, and it allows you to configure to consolidate them. So you can do this with WinLogBeat, or WinLogBeat rather. You can also do it with Windows Event Forwarder, where you can send it to a Windows Event Collector, and it can consolidate those event logs in a centralized place as well. Sneezes, man, it's like the COVID or something's got me. All right, so other implementations, once you actually get these event logs in place, you can actually put in a series of queries that can actually help detect a number of different types of attacks, like signatures, strings, focusing on anything where PowerShell executes with the word encoded associated with it, different camel case substitutions when CMD executes, to basically detect that on a Windows computer system, because usually most user accounts don't fire off cmd.exe. Of course, security people and systems administrators will, but it's not something that we see on a very regular basis. So now you can have all of these different rules and alerts created in your ELK stack to detect these types of logs whenever they come in off of Sysmon, search through those logs, and then trigger on certain keywords or certain things that actually happen as well. All right, Sigma is something I wish we could spend a lot more time on. So what Sigma does is it allows you to write your signatures for event logs and actually detecting, and it'll convert those signatures into a variety of SIM products. So think of it as Snort, right? So Snort basically allowed us to create a signature rule creation format for, or language for intrusion detection systems, specifically with Snort, but that signature base has then been carried over to every other different IDS system. So you write your signatures in one way, and then it can easily be ported to a wide variety of other SIMs. And this is cool for a number of reasons. One of those reasons is you have people a lot of the time that are like, well, I'm really good at writing Splunk rules. Well, that's awesome, but what happens if Splunk starts going away and it limits your job opportunities? Or if you're running just ArcSight, or if you're running, Elastic, for example. If you learn how to use Sigma, it allows you to write your signatures in one language, and then you can easily convert it and port it over to a whole bunch of other different languages. So what is ELK? ELK is Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. Logstash is an ingester. You can send your logs, and Logstash will receive those logs and then load it into an Elasticsearch database. And Kibana is the front end for the data visualizations. So that's what ELK actually means as well, right? So it's kind of like not necessarily a file signature. It's more a language for actually writing signatures that can be ported to a variety of different other computing platforms. It's actually closer to like Unix and C. So if you look at Unix, Unix was basically designed to be a portable operating system that could run on a number of different hardware platforms. So instead of you just getting completely locked into like AS400 or Cray or any of these other different types of platforms that existed, like VAX, you could learn Unix, and then Unix could be installed on all these different platforms. Same thing with C. If you wrote C, you could actually do configure, make, install to configure your C code so it would run on a variety of different platforms. So it's more like that. It's basically you can write your signatures, and then you can port those over to a wide variety of different incident management and SIM solutions as well. All right, so what about exchange logging? Exchange logging is a little bit more difficult. So what you need to do with exchange logging is it's not just logging one thing. You have to enable both the log file and ETW events, and then kick the maximum size up as well. All right, so with that, we're now getting on to the lab. I realized I'm running a little bit behind. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do Deep Blue CLI, and then we are going to quickly follow that with Sysmon. So we're gonna do 2 labs over the next, I would say probably half an hour, 40 minutes. We're gonna do Deep Blue CLI and Sysmon. So let's go to our VM. Okay, I'm gonna keep this down there. And I just wanna walk through how to update the logs real quick, or sorry, update the labs real quick. Once again, to update our labs, we're gonna go to C. We go inside of the intro labs folder, and then we do lab update pull. Double click it, updates the labs, all right? So we go C, intro labs, and then lab update pull, all right? So C, intro labs, and lab update pull. Now, once we're in here, we're gonna do 2 different labs. We're gonna do the Sysmon lab, and we're going to do the Deep Blue CLI lab. close out some of this stuff. Here we go. So go intro to security, and we'll start with Deep Blue CLI for me kind of explaining what it is you're going to do. So you're going to run your terminal as administrator. You're going to CD into Deep Blue CLI master, and then you're going to invoke PowerShell. And you're once again going to set the execution policy to unrestricted. And it should look like this below. Then you're going to run Deep Blue CLI against the new user security EVTX. And it's going to pop up and say, hey, these are the new user accounts that have been created. So we can actually detect whenever a new user account is created. Then with SMB password guessing, you'll be able to see that you have a user account that has a total of logon failures of 3,561 logon failures, which is just crazy. And then a full password spray. You can say these are all of the user accounts that this particular system tried to authenticate as, which is a lot of different user accounts. Then the last one is invoke obfuscation, and I'm going to spend some time talking about this one. But basically, obfuscation is where an attacker tries to scramble the actual code that they're running in their PowerShell to hide from signature-based detection. So you're going to see all kinds of things that are just ones and zeros. You're going to see all kinds of different case permutations. You're going to see a ton of different base 64 encodings. It's going to look like gibberish. It all executes, and it all executes malware, but it's basically encoding it in a variety of different creative ways to bypass signature-based detection. Now, when you're done with this lab, you're going to move over to the Sysmon lab. So we're going to do Sysmon and Deep Blue CLI. All right. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to have to do, and I clearly didn't get this set up. Well, this is weird. I thought I updated the instructions. Hold on, did I not update my labs properly? Hold on. Let me try to do a full blowaway of the labs, because I thought I updated it where we had the new AV disable script in here. I might be in the wrong VM, which would be freaking hilarious, and it'd be par for the course for me. Let's go to AppLocker. Well, that's really weird. Let me go to password spraying. I know I added it in. There we go. All right. So I don't know why my other labs didn't set up. So yeah, not all of them. So you're going to need to disable your antivirus. Let's just do that now as a group, okay? Just to make sure that it's disabled. So we're going to do this together. We're going to go to our Windows terminal. We're going to right click, run as administrator. And then we're going to paste in the command that disables our antivirus, all right? So I just put this in here. Yeah, that's what I did too. I thought it got rid of it, but anyway. So we're gonna paste that in to our PowerShell prompt. If you get a whole bunch of red, fine. That just means Defender is not turned on, which is great. If it just returns your pound prompt, congratulations, it actually shut it off for you. And remember, this is one of those things where you wouldn't like the Sysmon lab at all. This is one of those things where Microsoft updates somehow in the middle of the classes and it turns on Defender. It's like, oh, well, you have this off. Clearly you want this on, and it just turns it on. The VM by default has Defender disabled, and Windows tries to turn it back on. He messed up. I totally messed up. I don't know why my command, I thought I updated all of my GitHub pages. So I'm gonna have to go through and double check that during the lab. So once again, we're putting in the command that you run in PowerShell as administrator to disable Windows Defender. And then you're going to do the Sysmon and the Deep Blue CLI lab. I'm gonna put that here in this. There we go. And those are the labs we're going to do. So I'm going to give you all a few minutes, and then we're going to come back and then we are going to walk through them together. All right, so we're going to do these together. And there's also a possibility Sysmon is already running, and that's fine. It's perfectly cool. So let's go ahead. That seems, let's go to 45 after the hour. So we will go through the lab, and then I'm going to walk through it with everybody, and then we're going to take another break. All right. So why run PowerShell from the command prompt? I don't know why I did that, but you're right. It's just kind of weird, but that's just kind of the way I did the lab, I suppose. So once again, the command for disabling, the command for disabling your antivirus in a PowerShell prompt is on the Discord channel right now. All right, so let's get to it. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I'm gonna go hunt down what the hell is going on with my GitHub repository and why it didn't seem to update. I'm pretty sure I pushed that. So let's get to it. If you need anything, give me a holler.
You're muted, John.
Yeah, that seems to be that kind of day. Thank you. All right. So here we go. So we are back. So I updated the instructions in GitHub. So if you just wanted to do a quick get poll, the lab update that I thought was in all of my labs yesterday is now in there. So hopefully it doesn't disappear tomorrow, because then I'm going to start freaking out. But we now have that set up and ready to go. All right, so here we go. So let's get started. So we've disabled Defender for the session, and now what we want to do is we want to, oops, that was weird. So now what we want to do is we want to get full screen, because full screen would be just fantastic. There we are. So now what we want to do is we want to run our Ubuntu prompt, and we want to set up our Metasploit payload again. So I'm going to go with Ubuntu, and then I'm just going to start doing the copy and pasting thing. I'm going to start with ifconfig. We'll copy that. And then we're going to go over here, up. I'll just do it this way. And then I'm going to paste it in, get the IP address. My IP address changed since yesterday. So now my IP address is 172.208.180.197. So I've got that. Ready to rock and roll. I should double check it because I make mistakes all the time. There we go. There you go. So now we have our IP address. Now we're going to become root. And then we're going to go ahead and run this MSF Venom command. That isn't going to work. Does anyone care to tell me why this MSF Venom command is not going to work just by me copying and pasting it? Any take on why? It's not going to work because my IP address is not set. So what we're going to do is we're going to change that variable to be my IP address, which is 172.208.180.197. All right, and then I'm going to hit enter. There you go. You guys got it. Wait a couple of seconds. Hopefully it doesn't throw any errors, because errors suck. Because it's broken, intentionally broken. There we go. All right, so the size looks good to me. Now I'm going to cd into the temp directory as the instructions tell me to do. And then I can do ls-l trustme.exe. And you can see that it's a non-zero or small file size. So that's working pretty well. Then I'm going to start my Python server. Bam. Hit enter to get my command prompt back. I have the little ampersand at the end, and it allows me to get my command prompt back. Now we're going to run MSF console -q for quiet. And then we're going to hit our copy and paste. Alrighty, so there we have it set up. I'm going to use exploit multi-handler to receive that reverse connection coming back from that system. Then I'm going to set the payload to Windows Meterpreter Reverse TCP. Now, if you notice in the multi-handler, what I'm doing here actually matches the type of payload that I created with MSF Venom. So they're the same. And then I'm going to set my lhost to be my Linux IP address. I'm going to set it to 172.28.180.197. Got that running. And now I'm going to type exploit. All right, so now we have it up and running. Now all we need to do is download it and execute it. So we have it set up. But before we actually download and execute, we're going to want to start Sysmon, right? Because the goal is not, so I know there's some people that are confused. They're like, well, we had to disable antivirus. A real hacker won't make us disable antivirus. No, and a real hacker also doesn't have to run a class of 1,500 people. So in this, the goal is not necessarily, here's how you disable and bypass antivirus. It's basically, this is how we can actually detect oddities on our system. Plus, it's a good assumption that attackers will bypass antivirus, right? So I'm going to click the down arrow. We're going to open a command prompt as the instructions tell us to do. And I'm going to cd into tools as the instructions tell us to do. And then I'm going to execute sysmon. Now, there's a strong possibility I'm going to get an error. And that's probably because sysmon is already running. There it says the sysmon service is already registered. So there we go. So we've already got it up and running, which is fine. But I wanted to go through the instructions and I wanted to go over the instructions and actually how to start it on the system. So now we've got to surf from our Windows system over to our Linux system to retrieve the malware. So I'm going to make a connection to 172.28.180.197 on port 8000, like the instructions tell me. And we have trustme.exe. I'm going to download it. I'm going to run it. No whammies. I'm going to run it. And now over here, we have a interpreter session set up. Now, a little bit of background. Shouldn't this be localhost? Absolutely, positively not. Should not be localhost. The reason is localhost is your Windows system, and we're surfing to it from the Windows system. And your Linux system actually has a different IP address. So they're actually two different systems running on the same computer. So it's virtualization inside of virtualization. Vroom, 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 vroom. We must go deeper, all right? So it's like Inception, but with virtualization. So we're connecting from our virtualized Windows to our virtualized Linux computer system. So we're connecting in that way. So we've got our interpreter session up and running, and I can do things like I can list out files. I can look at processes. I can do key scan. Let's go key scan _start. There we go. I'm running a keystroke logger. I can open up Notepad. And I can type in, look at me. Hacking. There we go. And then I can go key scan _dump. So we've got all kinds of evil running on our computer system at the moment. I can even do shell and get a shell on the system, get full IP config. So basically we have hacked this Windows computer, right? We got full access to the system. Now, what we want to do is we want to actually go in and then look at the event logs, and specifically, we want to look at the sysmon event logs on this computer system and see our malware actually execute. So we're going to go in, we're going to start event viewer. And then we're going to go to Windows logs or application and service logs. Hurry up, come on. You can do it. There we are. And then we're going to go to Microsoft, Windows. We'll scroll all the way down to where we see sysmon. There they are. And then sysmon operational. And there are our sysmon logs. Now, when we're in sysmon, we can see a number of different events. And if we start kind of scrolling down, eventually we're going to see our Metasploit agent run. All right, so here we go. So let's go through what just happened. And I'm going to try to make this a little bit easier for us to see. Don't care about you, go away. Scroll this down. That looks good. That looks real good. All right. So what we see now is very similar to so it's very similar to what we saw in the slides, right? We can see that we have this weird executable that fired, and you can see the whole path to this executable, and you can see that it's actually in Microsoft Edge temp state downloads trustme.exe. So right off the bat, we can tell that this malware ran from the temporary internet directory for Microsoft Edge, right? So there we go. Persistence space minus R, Protagonistia. So it's the persistence command. So that's the one you want to run. So run persistence space minus R, and then you put in your IP address, and it'll create it so it automatically restarts every time. We see that we get the original file name was ab.exe and the full path, and then down below we can actually see the user ID that actually fired it. In this situation, the user ID is ADHD. Now, if I go up, the next log that I get, so we get the one log where the process executed, right? Where the process fired, that's event ID 1, but then immediately that particular process invoked a network connection, which in Sysmon is event ID 3, all right? So we saw the original event fire, which is the process execution, which is event ID 1, and then it opened up a network connection, and it was event ID 2, all right? Or sorry, event ID 3, which is network connections. Now, what we see here is really powerful stuff. We get the executable, we get the username that executed it, the protocol is TCP IP. We see that there was no IPv6 involved. We get the source IP address is 172.28.176.1. Now, some people, when they look at these logs, they're like, why is the system logging its IP address? It's on the system. Remember, Sysmon logs are meant to be forwarded to a log server. So you would absolutely want that IP address in the event log that is generated from that computer, because if it's in a logging server, it's going to have thousands of event logs. We don't want to have to try to dig that back. We want it right in the event log. So we see that in Sysmon, gives us a source IP address. The source port is 65,470, which means nothing. It's just the source port. That can be very useful, however, if we're trying to trace down like firewall logs. Like, what is the source IP address? We can go through and we can find that pair or tuple of the IP address, the port, and the destination IP address. We can match that up in our NetFlow or our Zeek logs. Then we have the destination IP address is 172.28.180.197, which is our Linux IP address as well. So we've got that, right? No, we haven't skipped the Deep Blue CLI lab. I'm going to come back to that one. I'm doing the Sysmon one first. So we'll come back and hit Deep Blue CLI. Just give it a second, all right? Now that's cool, but watch. If you remember, after I got access to the system, I decided to show you a couple of commands from Meterpreter, right? I just ran a few commands. So you can see that we had DLL host was actually invoked. Not a lot to really go off on this, like, oh my God, this is malware. But we actually dig in, and you now see that we have a process ID that executed of cmd.exe, all right? And this is where this gets really cool. It says that I fired off cmd.exe, but look at the parent process. If you look at the parent process, you see the parent process was trustme1.exe. So you can see that we had the trustme.exe process fired, made an open network connection, and then it ran cmd.exe. Then you can see it executed ipconfig.exe. And we can see that its parent process was cmd.exe, whose parent process was the trustme.exe, all right? So all of this is now giving us this amazing capability to actually see that process tracking of when that malware executed, what that malware did, and what are the commands that it executed. So that is powerful stuff. And these are the types of logs that we've always wanted to have on these computer systems. So down here, you can see the parent process ID. Sorry, I'm zoomed in really close, but the parent process ID and then the parent image is the executable that invoked it. So hopefully that answers your question, KE24. Did John write this malware? I didn't. Actually, Metasploit created it for us. So whenever we ran MSF Venom created that malware for us on the fly. All right. So would you run Sysmon on all company computers or high stakes computers? It depends. If the company computers are already running something like Cylance or Carbon Black or any of those tools, it gets a little bit redundant because a lot of those tools are actually tracking many of the exact same things as part of their EDR functions. So you're going to still get a lot of that just from the EDR itself. So it depends. But if you're in an environment and you have little to no budget for EDR, you can easily turn on Sysmon on all of your systems, and it will not overload the systems. It will not create CPU crashes. It is a very efficient utility to run to capture these things. And then you can forward it on to an open source EDR as well. So as you suggest using Sysmon only, it depends. On domain controllers, I recommend running the security event logs for Sherzies, but on the local systems, there's some attacks you're going to miss if you're just running Sysmon, but if you have to get one and only one that's going to get you like 80–90% of the way there, you're going to want to run Sysmon. And with a proper configuration, now your parent process, I'll go back to that here in a second, May, because remember, I'm looking at ipconfig. Its parent process is cmd.exe. CMD's parent process is trustme.exe. Trustme.exe's parent process is browserbroker.exe. So we're looking at different processes. So hopefully that hopefully answers the question for Box Swapper in May. So really powerful, and like I said, it's going to get you like 85% of the way there. There are some specific types of attacks that it will not detect. That does happen with Sysmon, especially whenever you're getting in some LSAS attacks as well. So do you always recommend it running it with WinLogBeat? I would recommend running it with WinLogBeat or Windows Event Forwarding to a Windows Event Collector. The point is get them off of that system. It doesn't matter. You can run Windows Event Forwarding to a Windows Event Collector, or you can run WinLogBeat and send it to Elastic. That's up to you as well. All right, so there are always challenges in DNS logging from Active Directory. So it turns out we don't have it in this configuration. Let me show you something to answer that question. There we go. So Sysmon recently added in DNS logging. So my config that we're running here doesn't have DNS logging. So you now have the ability to do full DNS logging in addition to the standard process execution and network connection logging. So it's there as well, game changer. So it is now a new feature in Sysmon. And I'm going to take this blog post and I'll share that with everyone as well. And we used Elastic EDR. We have actually, and Elastic EDR is actually pretty solid. And we'll talk more about Elastic EDR, other EDRs and endpoint protection projects a little bit later as well. So Rosie said that they've had good results enabling DNS debug logging in the domain controllers. This is a little bit less CPU intensive than enabling full debug logging on your DNS service in your domain controller. So it's a little bit easier for it to work as well. So there you have it. Trying to think, I think we're missing something. So let's go to Deep Blue CLI because that one's pretty quick. So I'm going to close this down. There we go. I'm just going to leave this up. So now we're going to do Deep Blue CLI. And with this one, it's pretty fast. I'm just going to CD into tools and what is it? Deep Blue CLI master. I don't need to run PowerShell because I'm already in it, but it would work either way. Set execution policy to unrestricted. Then let's go ahead and let's look at this event log and see if any new users were created. So it's going to ask me, do we want to run this? Yeah, we want to run this. I don't think I'm in the right window. Yes, I am. All right, so we're going to go ahead and run it. And it comes up and it says, hey, we have this user ID that was created with the name of Dash, which is bad. It's an administrator account. And then we also have an IE user account that was created. So we can check to see if an attacker actually was creating new user accounts on the system. So next, we're going to look at password guessing, security events. I don't know why you guys are taking a class from an instructor who can't copy and paste. Okay, that's not working. Let's go this way. All right, we'll paste that in. Go ahead and run it. Oh. There we go. So May just brought up a great point. The difference between this lab and the other one we did is the lab that we did yesterday, we were actually executing the password spray. We were running it against the local system. On this particular lab, what we're doing is we're looking at the event logs associated with that password spray as well. I got it in. So there we go. So you can see that this administrator account, somebody tried logging in 3,560 times. And then number of login failures for this particular account was, 3,561. So it's able to detect that as well. So now let's go ahead and let's look at an actual password spray and actually have it pull the user accounts instead of just the administrator account. So now we're going to look at what it looks like when it hits multiple user accounts. So how do you leverage Deep Blue CLI in a production environment? You can, but the problem is a lot of this stuff is tactical. But the biggest problem that I run into with this class is actually coming up with an open source free way to show you the importance of actually like the user and entity behavioral analytics. And Logon Tracer is something we were going to do, but Logon Tracer like greatly increases the size of the VM, and it also is a CPU and memory monster. It loves having multiple cores with lots and lots of memory. So the lab was almost unusable to do it with Logon Tracer for a system with 2 gigs of memory. Because those of you that are using 2 gigs, you already know it's pretty slow. So Deep Blue CLI does a lot of the exact same things that a UEBA does, but it runs it very lightweight in PowerShell. And it makes it very, very quick and easy for me to show you, hey, look, this particular system tried to log into every single one of these different user accounts on other computer systems. So it's really just absolutely, it's a training tool or an IR tool. It's articulating the importance of why we want UEBA. And you should really look at your SIM provider and try to get UEBA. So that's a really long answer for a very basic question. Hopefully that answered it for you, all right? All right, so that is the second to last one. The last one is looking at encoding. And some people were curious, like what the hell is actually going on here? All right, so this is a whole bunch of different types of encoding. And I wanna be honest, I don't know every bit of type of encoding that's going on here. So there's a toolkit that was released up above in the comments called Invoke encoding, or Invoke obfuscation rather. And it's a toolkit that allows you to obfuscate a bunch of your code whenever you're trying to execute malware on your computers, on the targets that you're going after. So there's a ton of ways to encode, and a lot of them, they just are easy to understand. Some of them are less easy to understand. So you can see this one, we have all kinds of weird upper and lowercase camel case substitutions. And the reason why they're doing that is a lot of endpoint security products look for strings with just a specific level of, like all lowercase or all upper or whatever. So that's pretty lame, but it does work on some systems. Now this one is pretty cool. Check this out. This one says long command line greater than 1,000 bytes. Look at the command. It opens up the command, nothing, 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 then the actual PowerShell to execute. What they did is they basically put a whole bunch of space at the beginning before it actually started the encoding. And the reason why is a lot of endpoint security products will go through and they'll set a maximum buffer size. for the analysis of what it's doing, right? And then here we have a bunch of, I think it's actually using, hexadecimal to identify the characters. So like hexadecimal 41 is a capital A, 42 is a capital B, %2B, we have plus encoding, / encoding, and so on. But we can actually identify that as hexadecimal characters. And then the other one, no freaking idea. This is just crazy, but it's still the exact same thing. It's still going to execute as though it is that PowerShell. More characters, instead of specifying each char, then 20, char 20, 4, char 5, char 125, it basically loads the characters in an array and then basically deobfuscates them all in the exact same way. This is base 64 encoding, just straight up base 64, because attackers use that all the time. Then somebody is doing it all ones and zeros and binary encoding, because that's weird. So these are a variety of different types of encoding schemes to bypass endpoint security products as well. And yeah, CyberChef is awesome. I'm going to plus up that for actually handling these different types of encodings as well. All right, so we went a little bit over. We're still going to take a break. Let's take a 10-minute break. We went right through it with the lab. It took a while. That's fine. I like to have separate breaks from the labs. I used to run all of my labs in breaks, and people wouldn't go to the bathroom. And I know it's important for people to get caffeinated and go potty as well. All right, so let's take a quick break. And when we resume, we will continue. What's the next session? Let's see what we're going to cover here for the next section. There it is. We will be talking about, advanced endpoint protection. So we'll talk about endpoint protections and a lot of the limitations of these products, and also how we can evaluate these products as well. All right, so let's take a break and we will be right back. All right, and away we go. Advanced endpoint protection. So as I mentioned with this course, it's like these are the 11 things that make an attacker's life difficult. It's actually 10 that make life difficult for a pen tester, and then backup and recovery that actually makes a real life of an attacker more difficult as well. So with this in mind, like advanced endpoint protection, I cannot stress two things enough. First, and most importantly, it can be bypassed. And we're going to show you that here in just a couple of seconds. There's some really, really cool things that we can do that really highlight that these things can and are bypassed quite regularly. But that being said, it is far, far more difficult to bypass these tools with advanced endpoint heuristics, artificial intelligence, than it is to bypass traditional denialist endpoint protection, right? So if you're doing traditional denialist, it's really, really, really easy to bypass, but it's like an evolutionary jump to get into bypassing a lot of these endpoint protection products that are out there as well. So let's go through and kind of talk about this a little bit. So if we're looking at MITRE, right, a whole bunch of initial execution techniques are stopped by these products. A whole bunch of the persistent techniques are detected and stopped by these products. Privilege escalation are detected and stopped by these products. Honestly, if you're looking at like the one thing that can make the biggest bang for your buck in the organization, it's an advanced endpoint protection product. But I caution people whenever I say that even though it is the most important, it is faulty. You can bypass them. And like I said, I'll show you some things where you can actually see that here in just a few moments. But the point is really important, but don't build your entire security support structure across this entire thing. Now, a lot of these products, whenever you're running the advanced endpoint protection suites, a ton of these products, actually the most effective thing they do is effective allow listing. I was thinking about merging these two things together, the allow listing section and this one. I decided to keep them separate. And the reason why is we have customers at Black Hills Information Security who run an advanced endpoint product, like they're running Cylance or CrowdStrike, but they're not running it in high enforcement mode. They're not kicking it up to where it's doing application allow listing. In those situations, it's a train wreck. We can bypass them. It is still better than deny listing, but the security of it is drastically reduced. And many organizations look at these two things as two separate security policies they need to enforce. One doing application allow listing, and the other one implementing an advanced endpoint product. Now, all of that being said, when we're talking about advanced endpoint protection and EDR. Many companies try to separate their products into two separate products, right? So you have like, detect and respond products, right? So you have a product that stops malware and one that's going to be there for forensics. And what's happening in the industry is these products are slowly converging on top of each other, where the EDR function is actually going to be built in to the endpoint protection products as well, all right? So as I mentioned, your AV, EDR, your advanced endpoint protection is part of your security support structure. And this is one of those things that I talk about a lot in almost every presentation I do. When we discuss defense in depth, we never really explain defense in depth all that well, right? We never really got down to the point of saying, hey, defense in depth is this. Instead, what people did, and this is the way I looked at it for years too, is the internet is out there. To gain access to my inside, they have to go through a firewall, through a DMZ. They have to gain access to bypass my antivirus to gain access to an endpoint, or break into a web server, or how people looked at defense in depth. Well, we got a whole bunch of money we spent. It's about yay high. So therefore, that's a really deep pile of money, therefore defense in depth. And that's not really what we meant, right? So when we're looking at this, we have AV EDR is one part of our defensive architecture. Then we can have network security monitoring is another part of our architecture. We have user behavioral and entity analytics would be another part of our architecture. We get in SIM or sandboxing or whatever. But what you're seeing here is you're seeing multiple overlapping fields of view for that specific asset that you are protecting, okay? Now, in the world of mathematics, to give you an idea of how much this matters, and this applies to what we're talking about, let's say for protecting an endpoint, anytime you have an area of overlap, it's a multiplicative factoring. If you have a Venn diagram and it's a circle that's not touching a circle, it's additive, right? You can have thing one, you can have thing two. But if thing one and thing two overlap, then it's a multiplication factor on that specific asset. So when you're looking at security, right? So with the security that we have here, the AV EDR multiplies the network security monitoring, which multiplies the UEBA, which multiplies the SIM to understand what's going on in protecting of that endpoint. The point of this is I can bypass AV and EDR. I can bypass network security monitoring. I can bypass UEBA, but it is incredibly difficult for me to bypass absolutely everything as an attacker, all right? So if you just had them all separate and there was no overlap, it'd be pretty easy for me to get around these things one at a time. But if they're all working in conjunction on an asset, it's much more difficult. So let's talk about EDR and managed detection and response. So when you're looking at EDR, it's usually a product that you would run on an endpoint. Managed detection and response would use an EDR to do their job, right? So managed detection and response is basically like, what happened is a bunch of people were doing SOC and they realized that collecting all event logs was stupid, and they got really strongly good at one product or two. So a managed detection and response is not like full logging and analysis, but it's usually using a network security monitoring solution in conjunction with an endpoint protection solution, in conjunction with an EDR solution to offer a defensive service for somebody. So anytime you see MDR, managed detection and response, we're talking about a service for you're managing the detection of attacks and response to attacks. So that's what MDR actually means as well. Endpoint would be a computer or a server, right? Absolutely. Get ready to pay. These products ain't cheap, right? Now, there's a whole bunch of different things I wish I had enough time to get into in one class, but when you're looking at these different products, right, one of the things you need to know is their pricing varies wildly for many of them. Many of these vendors will actually set their pricing model based on how much they think they can get you to spend. So if you're an organization with 1,000 endpoints, and there's another organization with 1,000 endpoints that's in a different market vertical, they're more than likely going to pay different cost than what you would pay. So that's somewhat difficult to get your head around, and it's scary, right? The other thing about these products is the price between some of these products is extreme. The price difference is way off the charts. Some of these products for a small to medium-sized organization will be like $100,000 a year. For some of these products, it'll go up to $1.5 million per year. You'll see that huge of a cost differentiation between these different vendors. Now, as an attacker, I don't care, right? I can't tell you that one of these products is exponentially better than the other. Even though if you talk to the vendors and you talk to CrowdStrike, they're going to be like, well, our product is so much better than Cylance. So our product is so good that our own pen testing team doesn't try to bypass it because it's just that good. Come on, really? Cylance used to say things like 0 false positives, which is total horse crap, right? Carbon Black's always been pretty solid in their marketing. But honestly, once you've actually made the jump into an advanced EDR product as well, you're really just not going to be looking. And actually here, type in your pricing. What's interesting is Captain Lucalis says we pay about $50 per endpoint for running Cylance. Cobalt Strike starts about $15 per endpoint for his organization. It's going to be all over the place, folks. It's 100% false negatives like that. What would I pick for each of these in defense and depth circles? I'm really a huge fan of what Endgame has been doing in Elastic and their free EDR, but I'm going to show you kind of how I come to some conclusions here in a little bit, all right? So there's some really cool stuff here, right? And this stuff is expensive, but you need to push back on the price that these individual salespeople give you on these products. Never assume that the cost that they try to set you up at is what you're going to end up paying. You can always push back on them and be like, oh yeah, if you could sharpen the pencil about 10%, they're going to give. The other thing that you can do is wait till you get a quote from your sales vendor and then don't respond like for days. Like wait for them to get panicky and start contacting you. And here's why. So if you look at a lot of these products and the way their sales cycles work, a lot of sales engineers are paid quarterly and they get bonuses based on what their sales were for that specific quarter. So I've worked with companies that they get a quote, let's say in the middle of the quarter, they don't respond to the sales engineer. And as they get close to the end of the quarter, the sales engineer starts freaking out, shows up, starts talking to them saying, hey, have you had a chance to look at that quote? I'd love to sit down and talk with you some more about that quote. And what you do is you talk to your internal team and say, look, if we can get a 20% discount on this product, can we tell them that we'll sign within like 24 hours? If you give them a time frame, the percentage discount you need to make that sale happen, as you get closer to the quarter, things happen a lot faster. Trust me on this. It just works really, really, really well to get through this. I'm not like that. John Strand's not going to get any sponsors for this class. Yeah, probably not. Really, that's good. So with this in mind, some additional things that you can do, and we'll talk about this more in a little bit, is the MITRE group has actually gone through and done evaluations of how these various products react to emulating different types of threat actors and what it is they detect and what they don't detect as well. So you can use that to negotiate. That's number 2 for negotiation. Number 1, wait till you get closer to the quarter. Number 2, actually start talking about how they did in the MITRE evaluations. Number 3, get multiple quotes. Get multiple quotes from all these different vendors. And the reason why, you're going to find one vendor that you like. And if you can go to Carbon Black and you can say, look, we got a quote from SentinelOne that was half the quote as you. Now, I'm not expecting you all to match that quote, but if we could maybe be 25% above SentinelOne, I think I could convince management in the next 2 days to actually sign. It gives you this negotiation power with the vendor to try to get them to actually move a little bit faster as well. All right, so incident response. So there's a number of different tools and utilities that are out there that'll show you processes and how a different process begat a different network connection and things of that nature. In our labs, and I need to update the screenshot, what we went with, and I'm not going through full EDR in this course, we actually did that in the intro to SOC, but if you want to, you can go through that lab, and I actually walk you through how do you set up, configure, and run Velociraptor to actually do analysis on an endpoint, right? So this is also critical. Run tools like Velociraptor, run tools like OpenEDR, run tools like Elastic's Free Agent in a lab before you start negotiating with a vendor. The reason why you do this is because when you're negotiating with a vendor, if you know like what the open source products and what the free products do, when you're comparing it with a commercial product, you're not paying for what the commercial product does. You're paying for what the commercial product does that the free tools do not do as well. So really, really important when we're trying to negotiate, setting up these things, testing them. I was talking with one of the vendors on this slide, I'm not going to say which one, and their EDR stuff wasn't as good as Velociraptor. I actually ended up on a call with a bunch of their engineers because they had taken classes from me, and we had a really strong heart-to-heart. I basically said, look, guys, and it was all gentlemen in the call, I said, look, this is bad, right? You're charging hundreds of thousands of dollars, and this free tool over here is absolutely smoking you in these following areas. I'm saying this because I love you all dearly, and I'd like to consider you guys to be friends, but come on, you need to get on this. Of course, one of the senior sales engineers came on and said that I didn't know what I was doing, and I had no idea about incident response, and it hurt, gonna be honest, right there. So then I got off the call. But at any rate, so it really is important for you to kind of talk about what their product does and what the open source products do, and get them to spin a little bit, get them to dance a little bit. It gets that cost down as well. All right, so Bluespawn. So in this class, as far as for advanced endpoint protection, it turns out that no vendors were willing to give me free copies to give out to, 1,500 to 3,000 people per class. Who knew, right? Like none of the vendors, like Carbon Black wasn't like, yes, we're going to give licenses to your students. Of course we're going to. None of them were wanting to do that. And I did actually talk to a couple of vendors and tried to see if they could do this, and they were absolutely mortified. But there's a little university in Virginia that had some students that were at a CCDC competition. And Mubix and Egypt, Mubix does a lot with Hack5, and Egypt did a lot with the Metasploit project for years. They actually were running the red team at the CCDC competition. And this little university in Virginia, they actually created their own endpoint detection product called Bluespawn. And it was catching everything that a cyber collegiate defense competition. So it's a bunch of university students that get together and compete in defending and attacking networks, well, predominantly defending networks. And then it goes up to like this national competition for universities as well. So there you go, CCDC, Cyber Collegiate Defense Competition. And this little tool that they wrote, they weren't allowed to bring in commercial tools. They wrote their own, was actually detecting a lot of the attacks that the red team, which was advanced, like professional red teamers, were throwing at it as well. So worked really well. So I was able to incorporate that in this class. So really cool. Has okay MITRE coverage. It's not as far as like you would get in a commercial product, but for actually going through and setting up something that detects attacks and describing the differences between detecting a signature and detecting an overall technique, beautiful, beautiful utility. So that leads us into threat emulation. Now, the reason why I think threat emulation is so critical is because if we're looking at our advanced EDR products and we're looking at what these products do and what these products don't do, many times the only kind of like validation we get as to whether or not it works is the word of the vendor. They're like, oh, we've got 100% coverage of the MITRE attack technique matrix. Trust us. Here's a brochure that shows that. Does it? I mean, does it really? Or is it missing some things? And how much does it miss? And do you care about what it misses? And how does it miss? Because how it misses matters as well. So this isn't something you should just look at and say, these are the only things that we should be looking at, but it's something we should be doing continuously, right? We should be doing adversarial threat emulation. We should be doing it, I would say, monthly, and seeing where our gaps are in actually detection as well. So a lot of vulnerability management programs, they focus just on missing patches and misconfigurations. That's it. That's all that they're ever looking at. Scanning, missing this patch, and fixing it. The idea of a missing patch or a misconfiguration is really the way that we were all getting access to environments about 10 years ago, right? And vulnerability management, if you look at like the MITRE attack technique matrix, it's 2 or 3 squares out of that entire thing that vulnerability scanning will detect. But all those other techniques are lateral movement, privilege escalation, persistence techniques that can be emulated in your environment relatively easily as well. So we think about that post-exploitation vulnerability management, and that's what you're missing predominantly from your vulnerability management processes as well. So there's a bunch of different free tools that are available, and there's some really great commercial tools as well. So one of the questions I like to hit is, you know, people ask me all the time, what's the difference between emulation and simulation? So many of the products that do simulation would fall in the category of like Atomic Red Team. There's nothing wrong with Atomic Red Team, but it's a whole bunch of scripts that execute the types of commands that malware would run. Once again, nothing wrong with that per se, but it isn't actually real malware. When you get to threat emulation, that's many times where you're creating real malware and you're running a series of scripts from that malware and you're executing it as well, all right? So let's talk about some open source tools. The first one we want to talk about is Caldera. Now, what Caldera does is allows you to install an agent on multiple different systems. So you can see in this Caldera example, there's 5 computer systems that are running the Caldera agent. On the right-hand side, you can specify what are the execution steps that the malware emulation is going to do. And in Caldera, you have a ton of different profiles where you can emulate malware execution for different APT groups, all right? So you can say, okay, as soon as they gain access, I want them to inject a process with run DLL 32. I want them to do DLL hijacking. I want them to set up an auto start entry point. I want them to set up a registry key. I want them to do these following 23 things. And Caldera's agents will go through and run that for you. Now, Caldera is awesome. It's by MITRE. A little bit difficult to get set up, and it also is a little bit buggy. But once again, it's free, right? And if we're looking at free, it's in your budget, and it does a very good job of doing that testing and that evaluation for you. Now, the big one that we use is Atomic Red Team, and that's what we're going to be running in this course here in just a little bit, and it's going to take us up to the top of the hour into the next break. Now, Atomic Red Team is so cool. In fact, this whole topic is so cool. We have a class that we teach called Adversary Emulation, and it's by Carrie and Darren Roberts. Now, Carrie works for a Fortune 1 company, and she is a member of the Atomic Red Team team. So she actually goes through and is a developer for Atomic Red Team. And it was cool. There was a bug in the class last week in Atomic Red Team, and Carrie was able to go in and edit it and fix the bug and fix the lab. It's just awesome whenever you have one of the developers there. And then, yep, it is a paid version. It is a paid class because I didn't write it. So somebody else needs to feed their family. So Carrie and Darren do that. Now, the reason why we like this tool is there's a lot of support around this tool in the community. And it's not full emulation. It's simulating what an attacker would actually do. So it's not as cool, or I would say even representative of emulation, but it gets you that 80-20 point fairly quickly. Doesn't have a cool GUI, which some people are bummed about, but it does have a wicked cool command line utility where you can invoke the test. It actually has it has a full execution harness around it. So it's very, very neat for you to actually execute these things. I fixed the fix. There we go. Yeah, it is. Atomic Red Team is more simulation than emulation. So whenever you're thinking emulation, think of dropping malware, an actual executable, and then running your attacks through that executable. That would be much closer to what real malware is going to do. Whenever you're running Atomic Red Team, you're running a whole bunch of scripts that are there in the directory, and it executes these different scripts. And that's not at all the way real malware executes. But still, it works just fine. It's just absolutely fine as well. All right, so let's go ahead and let's drop down into how it executes. One of the things I love, and this is kind of what you get from the simulation, that is kind of cool. So when you're looking at this, yeah, Jeremy, if you're running this, fully expect that the system you're going to run it on, you're just going to smoke that system. It's going to just light up like a Christmas tree when you execute it, just because it does so many bad things to that virtual machine. And you're going to see that. We're going to actually execute it for about like 15 seconds and then kill it. And then we're going to try to clean up, and your system's going to be buggy from that point on. It won't hurt your your domain or anything, but yeah, that system it runs on is pretty bad. So is Atomic Red Team better than don't make sure we don't interfere with other classes. Look, we're running a lot of stuff. They're going to overlap, but everything's recorded, so I can't quite do that. So some people are asking, what is the difference between this and something like Cobalt Strike? Cobalt Strike is something we use in every pen test, and that would be closer to emulation, but it doesn't necessarily have the full automation built into it. You can do it through aggressor scripts in Cobalt Strike, but usually what you're doing in Cobalt Strike is you're getting access and then you're pivoting and moving around in that environment as well. So I said in 504, 2 commercial products are the only ones I recommend are Burp and Maltego. I would still say that that's true. You know, if you're going to run vulnerability assessment, you're going to be running Nessus anyway. You're going to be for cheap solutions, but anything else, there are open source and free alternatives that you can actually work through. So that's true as well. So I guess I could back up my work computer in an ISO and play around with it, or what you could do is just run it in the VM. So your VM is like a nice little sandbox that you can run here, Drogi. I want to put it out there, VM issues killed most of my learning so far today, but thanks goodness you guys have tech supports and videos. I'm sorry, you know, with the VMs, you know, VMware is getting less and less stable all the time. It's just kind of the way it is, and I have to kind of come up with a platform. All right, so back to what we have in the slide. So what I like about this is we have the Atomic Red Team, and it says there is this technique that it's going to run, and it's the technique is RegServe 32 to actually execute and invoke malware and actually run it on there as well. So with that, it tells you what it's going to do. It gives the actual scripts, and it tells you, hey, you're going to run calc.exe whenever it runs. So this is nice for a number of reasons. One, you can see what it's doing. So you have people all the time who's like, how do we know we can trust this? Many times you don't. I mean, you can't give 100% guarantee, right? You just can't on anything, but you actually have the full script of what the test actually does, and that's pretty cool, right? So you can actually visualize it. It'll also help you go through and run it. It'll actually go through and run it, and then it will give you the technique, and you can look at how that technique works, and you can write a signature for it. So it actually helps you write better signatures as well. So as I said, do people feel comfortable running these tools like Atomic Red Team? So I'd like to ask that to you. So for those of you that are on this session, I know we haven't ran it yet, we're going to, but going into this, how many of you are comfortable running tools like Atomic Red Team in your environment? Do you feel pretty good about it? The interesting thing about this, and we're going to see the answers roll in here, is the interesting thing for me is that, you know, a year ago when I first started running this class, the answer was a pretty solid no. Like almost universally, everyone was like, no, I'm not comfortable running these tools at all. And then as time progressed, we're seeing more and more people that are getting more comfortable with the idea. And I think that as we get exposure, more importantly, as you run this tool, and you'll learn that you should run it inside of a virtual machine in an Active Directory environment, it gets people more comfortable with the idea, right? And this goes back to vulnerability scanning. If you go back years ago, like 18 years ago, vulnerability scanning companies were really nervous about vulnerability scanning. And the reason why was they honestly hadn't ran it before, so it's something new. So the lizard part of your brain is like, it's new, I don't like it, right? It's like music. You listen to music today versus the music you listened to as a child, and you're like, it's all crap. I think South Park even did an episode about how people hate music. We don't like new things, or most of us don't. So the goal of this is to get you familiar with running these tools and running it in a sandbox environment, never in a hospital environment. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Do not put your change request that John Strand told me to run it. I would like to see that, see if it actually goes through, right? So we can see that. So the idea is to get you more familiar with this as well. All right, so another open source tool that many people don't think about for adversarial emulation, Bloodhound. I know that that seems weird because we're not emulating malware with Bloodhound. It's literally going through and attempting to enumerate lateral movement paths to get to domain administrator. That's pretty cool, but it turns out it really does a good job of running a number of different checks for lateral movement techniques in your environment. So that works out really, really well. Now, threat emulation warning, one of the traps that you run into, and this goes back to a couple of slides ago, is people start writing signatures for the explicit command that is executed. Like I have seen, I'm not kidding, I have seen people write signatures for anybody that runs RedServe32, Atomic Red Team, Atomics T1117, source redserve32.set script object, generate an alert. No, no, no. The attacker's not gonna put their full malware in the path of the freaking Atomic Red Team. So, it's frustrating, right? We don't want to write these specific, very, very on the point signatures to detect exactly what Atomic Red Team does. We want to abstract it back and basically say, well, if we see anything executing with script object, we probably want to look into it. We don't want to give it the full directory path as well. So most attacks in Atomic Red Team and MITRE are representations of classes of attacks. Attackers can actually modify it. So if you're writing a signature in something like Sigma, you need to take a step back and think, how could an attacker actually obfuscate this to get past the signature-based detection as well? And yes, we are seeing vendors to this day that are like, you know what? I'm just gonna write signatures for the specific attacks. And then I could say I have 100% detection of MITRE, woo! And it just takes an attacker who knows how to modify their attack signatures just slightly to blow right on through those particular detections as well. Now there are commercial offerings, right? There's AttackIQ, Varonis, XM Cyber. Our personal favorite is Scythe. That's the one that we use at BHIS all the time. And that's, you know, I'm good friends with Bryson and the team at Scythe. And then of course, Grim, I go way back with Grim and the pen testing side of Scythe. But it's an amazing product. Like it's very easy to get it set up and running and you get results from it almost instantly. And the other thing that I like about Scythe is the way the license is structured, where you can run it in multiple locations and they're not going to charge you per location, which is great. Very, very cool things. Yes, Cyber Gandalf, right? All right, they also have cool shirts. One of my favorite possessions, I have a Scythe hoodie that has the unicorns on the back, the death unicorns on the back. And by the way, do you know what you call a group of unicorns? What is the word for a group of unicorns? It's called a blessing. So now Grim, yeah, Grim and the unicorns, things like that. They also throw good parties. I'm too old for parties. It's just kind of it's kind of a thing where I go to a party and they have like the uns, and people are like vaping weird things and people are like, drink this and you'll experience everything she experienced. Yeah, I'm just really, really old. I don't like doing that anymore. Nope, it's called a blessing. Ooh, unicornucopia. That's even better. All right, so let's get into a problem. And this highlights so many issues in this industry as well. So with this, MITRE went through and did attack evaluations of a wide variety of different products, and they emulated the techniques utilized by APT3, APT1, APT28 or 29, and a couple of other groups as well. So it started out like relatively innocent, right? We're just going to take your products and we're going to run through what APT1 does, and we'll see what happens. And it turned into a freaking train wreck. And I know that people at MITRE are like, well, it wasn't that bad. Yes, it was. Nothing that MITRE did was bad per se, but the way the vendors took it and how they executed based on the results, complete clown show. All right, it's just horrible. So let me walk through. So they had a number of different detection categories. They didn't detect anything. They had telemetry, MSSP. MSSP is interesting because if the tool didn't detect it, but if they forwarded the data up to their managed security service provider and it detected it, then they said the tool detected it. So I throw that out immediately. If you have to take the alerts from your tool and send it to an MSSP for detection, you need to fix your freaking tool, right? Like, it's crazy. It's not like, well, our product only works if you buy our service. The hell? That's crazy. General, specific tactic or technique, right? Now, what's interesting is Josh went through, and because MITRE, whenever they did this, MITRE didn't rank anybody. So let me show you what MITRE did. So MITRE didn't want this all to become like a ranking. Okay. Here we go. So MITRE didn't want to rank anything. God, did Bing actually give me what I'm looking for? That would be weird. Okay, not really. All right, so here we go. So they did APT3 29 and FIN 7. So I'm going to go to APT3. All right, so MITRE didn't want to do the evaluation of these advanced endpoint products and say, congratulations, CrowdStrike. You are the winner of the MITRE Attack Evaluation APT3. And it's like, there they are, looking at CrowdStrike. And it's like, oh my God, you love me. You really love me. They didn't do that because they knew if they actually did like a stacked ranking of the different vendors, that they would have vendors that be like, F you, I'm out. Like, well, I don't want you to evaluate us and compare us with everybody else. So MITRE basically made it so if you wanted to see how someone did, you had to click on that person. So you had like for CrowdStrike. So we click on CrowdStrike, and how did CrowdStrike do? They did okay, right? So let me make this a little bit wider. So we can look at these different things and, you know, did they detect everything? Yes or no? Did they miss stuff? Yes or no? And what's interesting about this is if you look at the major steps, if you look at none, and then some of the other ones, they have MSSP, they missed stuff, folks. Like you can see that they missed 2 of the privilege escalation. They missed 1 of initial discovery. They missed 1 of the initial compromise. So you can actually look at these different results of these different breakdowns of these products. And you can see that they all missed stuff, right? But they don't make it easy for you, right? So you can't be like, well, can I actually do, can I do a full breakdown of how one product did for the other? No, they didn't quite give us that. So Josh did. So Josh, running through this, actually created a Python script that allows you to do eval scoring of these particular products. I think I have the link in my notes. I thought I did. Yeah, I do. Okay, so here we go. Let me put this in here. There's the eval scoring if you want to actually set it up. And what's weird is whenever you actually look at the results of Josh's tool, it actually shows you that some of these tools, he came up with his own way of coming up with a scoring based on how people missed and what they missed and all these different things. And he gave them a score, right? So you can see that McAfee got a score of 268, Carbon Black got a 259, F-Secure got a 376. Like, how in the hell did that happen? And I know how that happened, so just give me a second. Palo Alto got a 329, and like RSA, it's like, did RSA, are you alive, RSA? Is this thing on? Like RSA got like 78, right? So that's, wow. So that's his scoring system, right? But we get into the misses and you start getting an idea of how he came up with some of the scoring. So McAfee missed 38 techniques. Carbon Black missed 34. Cyber Reason missed 24. Microsoft missed 23. Palo Alto missed 9. So you see how many of these different tools missed the different types of checks. Okay. Here's where this gets crazy. Whenever they ran these tests for the misses and all these different things, whenever they ran these tests, they ran it with two tools. The first tool that they ran was PowerShell Empire, and the second tool they ran was Cobalt Strike. So they went through and they could have automated it with a number of other commercial tools, but they decided to set it up with using PowerShell Empire and Cobalt Strike. And they executed all these things from PowerShell Empire and Cobalt Strike. And they still missed things. Now, the reason why this is like really, really, really funny is because PowerShell Empire and Cobalt Strike are the most commonly used pen testing tools today for implant creation and deployment on organizations for doing pen testing. It just is, or they just are. And Cobalt Strike more so than PowerShell Empire. And they've been used for years. And many of these tools missed the techniques of lateral movement, escalation, and all these different things from these tools that pen testers have been using for years, and they still missed it, right? So it's like, here's literally the tools that all the offensive community is using. The only way you could have done worse is if we would have ran Metasploit in this, and then they missed that. So they missed it for Cobalt Strike, and they missed it for PowerShell Empire, these misses. And what's funny is what these vendors did after the testing from the attack evaluations is they got really good at detecting Cobalt Strike and PowerShell Empire. It wasn't an issue of, oh my God, we didn't do very well, let's start detecting these generalized techniques. They started writing scripts and signatures to detect a specific freaking tool, which that's the clown show. It's not MITRE's fault, right? They needed to use a tool to do the emulation. But like the week after this came out, Cobalt Strike for all of our pen tests was lit up like a freaking Christmas tree. Everywhere we went, everybody was detecting Cobalt Strike. So we just switched over to Silent Trinity and then our custom malware called MoleRat, and we were fine. You know, as soon as we went, oh, Cobalt Strike's not working, I guess we'll go over here. It worked. So the biggest problem that I have with this is this goes back into how vendors look at like these types of evaluations. So like, how do we detect exactly what they did? It's not how do we make our product better. It's about how do we detect what they're doing in the evaluation so we can do better. So if you're looking at NSS Labs, same damn thing. NSS Labs, for some vendors who are willing to work with NSS Labs, are allowed to come in and tweak and modify their tool so it performs better. Other vendors say, F you, NSS Labs, and their product doesn't do as well. So these vendors get really wrapped around the axles for being able to perform well in the testing and the evaluation, and not the core concepts that are actually executing from this. But this is good for you, because if you're looking at these vendors, you can look at these different results of how these vendors did. And this is just, I think it's APT1 is the one that's showing up here. You can use this as a negotiation tactic. If you're going in and you're talking to, let's say, CrowdStrike, right? And CrowdStrike is like, oh, well, you know, we're really expensive. Look at us in our monocle and our top hat, and look at us in our Bentley. Yes, yes, pay us money. You'd be like, well, CrowdStrike, folks, you missed 22. Endgame, who is now the free agent for Elastic, missed 14. And your product is like infinitely more expensive than theirs. Why should we be paying you all that money? Now, that doesn't mean that CrowdStrike is garbage. It doesn't necessarily mean that Endgame is great, but it at least gets you into a level set conversation of why are you charging me so much money for this, okay? So just absolute craziness for trying to deal with it as well. All right, so I wanna show you all how to do evaluation. So we're gonna take a 10-minute break. We're gonna come back and we're gonna do the lab for BlueSpawn and Atomic Red Team. And then I'm gonna walk you all through it. And then we're gonna close out with Ask Me Anything. So let's hit the restroom real quick. All right, so let's carry on. Let's go ahead and let's get started with BlueSpawn and Atomic Red Team. Here we go. So go ahead and start it up. And I'm gonna close this out. I'm gonna open a brand new terminal. I'm gonna right click, open it as administrator. There we go. Now, get the instructions up. So we're going to start with BlueSpawn right here. So once again, we want to disable our antivirus because, just to be completely honest with you, there is absolutely nothing that your antivirus is going to like at all about Atomic Red Team. It's really going to hate Atomic Red Team like a lot. All right, so we're going to open up a command prompt and we're going to start BlueSpawn. Now, just so you know, BlueSpawn is not meant to be like, oh, this can go toe-to-toe with Cylance. No, it's basically the equivalent of a free open source stand-in for your endpoint security product. And it actually sets up and it actually looks for a large number of different techniques in the MITRE ATT&CK technique matrix, right? So it's looking for Win logon helper, port monitors, accessibility features, logon scripts, registry run keys, web shells, things like that. All right, so that's what it's going to be looking for. Then you're going to open up a PowerShell terminal, and then you're going to CD into the Atomic Red Team invoke Atomic Red Team script directory. You're going to install the module, PowerShell YAML, so it basically gets YAML support. And then you're going to import module invoke Atomic Red Team. And then, this is important, you're going to run invoke atomic tests all, and you're going to count to 10 Mississippi. So 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, and then you're going to hit Control C, right? You're only going to let it run for about, you can go 15 seconds, whatever. Don't just let it run, because it just will turn your system into a smoldering crater. So once again, like I said, whenever you're running this in your company environment, you would set it up on a domain joined VM that you will blow away and be done with the domain user that is a test user. You will run it and try to see what your SIM actually detects with it as well. Then if you go back to the BlueSpawn, that's the lab we're on right now. So with BlueSpawn, we got the 16 May, dogs and cats living together, pandemonium, it's bad. I'm gonna talk about zero detections and actual like 4 detections and things like that here in just a little bit. And then when you're done, you're gonna do invoke atomic tests all cleanup. And then if you go back to BlueSpawn, BlueSpawn will actually detect Atomic Red Team cleaning up after itself as well. And that'll take a little bit longer. Now, if you have more time and you wanna play around with this, especially whenever we get to the Ask Me Anything, fire up BlueSpawn and keep it running, and then go through the app locker or sysmon instructions to create and execute malware on your computer, execute Meterpreter, and then execute registry key changes, run key scan start, key scan dump, and see if BlueSpawn detects those. So it's a little bit of extra things that you can do as well. All right, so let's go to it. I'm gonna let you all run with this lab for probably about 5 to 10 minutes. And then when we come back, I'm gonna walk through it with everybody. And we're gonna talk about that detects and that misses, where it's like, hey, I have this particular group policy thing showed up, but I didn't detect anything. I'm gonna explain why that's important versus the actual signatures. So once again, we're gonna take about 10 minutes and then we are going to get started on the rest of the class, and then we'll close out with the Ask Me Anything. All right, so I've seen a couple of comments come up. Just to let you know, I wanted to hit a couple of things. One, the Atomic Red Team scripts aren't going to escape from your VM and take over the rest of your home network. They're not. I mean, they're just not. That's not how they work. It does do a lot of auto start entry points on the VM, and you'll see like pop-up boxes whenever you log in and PowerShell boxes. But it's not creating a virus or a worm that's going to go through your system. So don't panic. I know that a lot of people get nervous whenever they're working with offensive tools, but that's the only reason why you're nervous is because you haven't worked with them. Offensive tooling, by and large, doesn't just jump out and start attacking the networks like artificial intelligence. It's something that happens in James Bond movies. Where you basically take this notebook computer and plug it into the rest of your actual sensitive classified network to do analysis on it, and then it basically takes over the entire building and causes explosions. That only happens in the movies. That only happens in the movies. This stuff isn't going to break out your home network or your corporate network. You don't need to shut off the internet connectivity when it's running. Don't panic about it. I guess that should be another another t-shirt, as John Strand says, here, trust this, or here, hold my beer, I guess. But no, there's certain level of paranoia that's good, but you start getting to the point where you're almost too paranoid, where it creates paralysis. And whenever you're looking at a lot of these different tools and you're like, oh, I don't know, we shouldn't run this, and you might do, don't worry, all right? If you're gonna end up hurting a network, almost universally, it's gonna be from something like a password spray. And you shouldn't be doing password sprays unless you're really comfortable with what the password spray is doing and the policies around it. And we talked about that yesterday already. So honestly, if you're going to run this in the, if you're going to run this in your own environment, what you would do is you would set it up in a VM, have it networked, can get to the domain, set up a domain joined VM with a domain user account that's a test user account, then run it and see what actually shows up in your SIEM. And when you're done, just revert the VM to snapshot. That's the best thing that you can do, and it makes it go away as well. So there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of fear, especially if you've never done anything on the offensive side, into what are the dangerous things that can actually deal with. Password spraying sounds unhygienic. That's right, it does. I never thought of it that way. It's funny. We actually had. There's a bunch of things in computer security. Like we used to have backdoors, right? And you would have like a backdoor to a computer. And then we actually had things that we'd call promiscuous sniffing backdoors. And, you know, it's just like in the industry, that's just what you called them. But I would get these people in my classes, they'd be like, as soon as I'd start talking about a promiscuous sniffing backdoor, they'd just start giggling uncontrollably. And for the long time, I didn't know what the hell they were laughing about. It's just, you know, it's just that part of your brain gets shut down sometimes with these terminologies. And also backdoors and breaches. Called it backdoors and breaches because we had pivots and payloads and we had cubicles and compromises. So we basically stuck with the theme backdoors and breaches because that's what it is. We talk about backdoors and then breaches. And somebody was like, oh, that's a double entendre. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I get it now. So I'm kind of an idiot, I guess, in that way. So yeah, anything that says trustme.exe is A-okay for everybody, right? So let's go through this lab very quickly and then let's wrap up and let's get into the Ask Me Anything for this particular class as well. All right, so I already went through and I shut off my Windows Defender. And I'm going to open up BlueSpawn. I'm going to CD into the tools directory, and then I'm going to copy and paste this command. But first, I need a command prompt. So let's go ahead and let's set up the command prompt over here. CD into tools. Oh. There we go. And then I'm going to run BlueSpawn client, and it's going to run log level cursory. So now it's running. It isn't doing anything yet. That's nothing crazy. Now in the PowerShell command prompt, we're going to CD into the Atomic Red Team, invoke Atomic Red Team directory. We're there. And then we're going to install the PowerShell module named PowerShell YAML. YAML. Yet another. Well, it helps if you actually type in things correctly. Takes a couple seconds. And then we're going to invoke Atomic Red Teams all. I'm going to go yes to all. There we go. Get my command prompt back. All right. And then we're going to invoke Atomic Red Team tests all. There we go. Oh, I forgot to import module. All right, so we're going to import the module first. There we are. Now we're going to invoke the Atomic Red Team. So yes, we want to run this because there's nothing bad that can come from this at all. All right, so now it's executing the scripts, and some of them just like freak out in red. They're like, ah! And then others like run in green, and we're going to let it run for a little while. All right, so there we go. I've got enough. I'm just going to hit Control C because I can't take it. Can't take it anymore. Can't take it. It's too much. Too much. There. Now, if we go over here, we can see that we've got a bunch of detections that fired. Right now, I want to walk through what we're actually seeing here because I think it's important to kind of understand how this actually works. Right. So whenever they created BlueSpawn, BlueSpawn was they actually created it so it's smart enough to actually detect that somebody was modifying group policy, and also understanding that specific signatures were important as well. So this is actually, in some ways, their approach is better than most EDR products in their overall philosophy, not in their depth and breadth of what they're actually doing, but the approach is nice. So you can see whenever we modified group policy, it said, hey, I saw there was group policy that was modified like 10, 15 times, right? And I got 0 detections. So what it's saying is somebody changed group policy on this system. It didn't match any existing string or detection that I have, but someone changed group policy on this computer system. So that's great, right? It's not exclusively based on just a signature, but it's also looking at what the actual attack is doing. Now, one of the things I wish it would do is if it said group policy modification, 0 detections, it would say what was modified. So it didn't necessarily, here's the signature, but it would say, signature in question or modification in question or something like that. That would be really cool. And then masquerading, same thing. So masquerading was happening, but it didn't match a specific string, right? Now down below the Win Logon Helper DLL, it actually had like actual signatures that fired. So not only did we see Win Logon Helper fire, but it actually matched a known malicious signature. So this would be like a higher tier of an actual alert as well. So that's really cool, right? That gives us some visibility into what's going on, whether or not a specific signature fired or whether or not it was just an overall some type of modification to something like group policy. So the last part of this lab, I had you all run invoke atomic tests all cleanup. Let me copy that. And I'm going to run that and let it clean up. And that's going to take a little while for it to run. So you're actually going to see more detections from BlueSpawn because it's going to end up touching parts of the system that are of interest, right? So there you can see group policy modification again basically showed up as well. So would you leave this running? You could. I mean, if you were in a pinch and you had no endpoint security product that you could run, yeah, this would actually help you, right? This would actually be an effective tool in a pinch. This is not something that you would want to run like in every single server. I mean, this is by a bunch of university students and they're doing a really good job. Like I'm very impressed with what they did, but it's not something that I would run in production, not yet, right? So it's one of those projects I want to donate to. I'm going to kill this because I know it's got all my stuff cleaned up. I want to donate to this project, but it's absolutely something that is not ready for running in a production environment. Now, if you're a small company, right? Like if you're running in a small medical shop and you have like 15 systems, then yeah, I mean, it'd probably be way better than nothing at all as well. So I'm going to leave this thing running now, and let's kind of run through some fun stuff by actually going through and creating some malware. So I'm going to go into my app locker instructions, and I've already disabled my antivirus, and I'm literally just going to do the exact same instructions. And I don't think my IP address has changed. No, it hasn't. So let's just go through and let's set up. Let's fire up MSF. Oops, didn't want to do that yet. Didn't want to do that yet. Stop. Thank you. So let's run MSF Venom. Put in our Linux IP address. Creating our malware again. There we go. CD into temp. Oh, looks like it's already running. Kill all space -9 Python. There we go. Now it's running, and then we're going to run MSF console. That's cute. So give that a couple of seconds to start. Let's go reverse TCP. I don't know whose idea it was to make it go ding-a-ling every time I hit tab, but it drives me insane. Let's go set the L host to 172.28.180.197. I think I got that right. I get that right? You did. And exploit. There. All right. So now we've got it running. So the same thing we do every time is we're going to serve to our Linux IP address. There we go. We got a Meterpreter session. Great. So apparently my existing Meterpreter was still running and wanted to get back home. So now we have a Meterpreter session running, and then we can do things, and we can see if we can actually see if BlueSpawn detects it, right? So I've got a registry key thing that's really long, and I don't have it memorized, but I'm going to start with key scan start. There we go. That's weird. So it didn't like that. Let's actually drop into a shell. Let's add some registry keys. Oh. There we go. And let's see if any of these things that I'm running are showing up over here. So it looks like it's picking up a couple of detections as well. Yeah, make every single time you hit a key. So you can sit around and you can play with this stuff, and you can really get a better understanding of what is detectable and what's not. So get another Metasploit shell over here. We should get a duplicate that shows up. But the reason why I kind of want to do this, I want to show you two separate things, right? So the first thing is you can run atomic red team scripts, and you can run like the shotgun approach, and you can say, here's a whole bunch of things, see what you can actually detect. The other thing that you can do is you can go through to just checking for specific types of techniques. And you can still, it's still popping up techniques every once in a while, still identifying some things as they show up. So it's important for us to have that ability to actually do kind of that kind of gross, high level, like adversarial emulation, but also getting down to a razor blade and very fine level testing as well, because you're gonna have a situation where, oh, well, the MSF webcam, it only works if you're on a system with a webcam, and if you're in a VM, the webcam doesn't fire because I don't have the webcam actually bridged. And if I did, and I know this from experience, if I took the webcam, that one, and I bridged it down, it actually crashes the entire VM and it kills GoToWebinar. So that was a really, really funny demo the first time I did it. All right, yeah, good times were had by all. So that's it. So that's where we wanted to be. I think we're right on track now for class. I think we are. Yeah, we're actually perfectly paced right now for today. Now tomorrow we're going to start talking about host-based firewalls. We're going to talk about vulnerability assessments. We have a lot of things that we're going to cover tomorrow as well. No, actually you're not. So Ebenesium brought up, are we trying to detect Metasploit with BlueSpawn? So BlueSpawn actually doesn't detect Metasploit executing at all. But whenever we do a lot of the post-exploitation stuff, it detects some of them. So the goal of that is to kind of show you that you can do a whole bunch of tests with Atomic Red Team, or you can actually drill down with something like Metasploit and test out a handful of techniques and see how your EDR detects it. So that was kind of the goal of what I wanted to do there as well. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully that helps. All right, so let's start kicking up the questions. So ask me anything. Any questions you have about security at all, now is the time. Oh, we got some people typing. I really don't like the delay that we get in Discord. Discord, I think what Discord is doing is a lot of what people type. It's actually sending it through filters and getting a little bit of a buffer, and it's kind of doing the hot dog, not hot dog filter on it as well. Is the BlueSpawn cleanup generally confiable? Yes, it is, absolutely. Can you explain briefly how to use threat intelligence in a SOC? Are there any free and open source tools that we can use to get started? Yes, we actually have a full-on webcast where I talk about threat intelligence, because I absolutely hate threat intelligence in the way that a lot of people like use it. The idea for many people is we're going to have threat intelligence, we're going to get a whole bunch of blacklisted or deny listed IP addresses and URLs and domains, and we're going to stop people from going to them. That doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. So threat intelligence that does work is if you do find something weird in your environment, do you have the ability through your EDR to do a search for that across your entire environment? That is really a good skill to have. If you're doing research, if your system's communicating back to an IP address, can you do research on that IP address using tools like Shodan to identify what's on that IP address without actually scanning that IP address? Well, that's really good threat intelligence. It's almost like threat research. I hate threat intelligence because it's like we can buy it and we can implement it, stuff it into our SIM, and all of a sudden we're more secure. And that's garbage. What most security vendors are doing is your firewall vendor and your proxy vendor and your antivirus vendors, they're collecting hashes of bad executables, different signatures in bad executables. They're collecting bad URLs, bad IP addresses. That's literally their freaking job. And then people are rebuying that exact same crap again and then loading it into their SIM. It's insane. The other thing about threat intel is if you look at the overlap on threat intel feeds, there's something like 10% at the most. So a lot of people are like, well, you're going to buy all of them then. And that's just garbage. They're all seeing different parts of the elephant, so they're not seeing the whole picture. So that's why we got to go back to multiple overlapping fields of visibility and not relying on just one or two things to do detections as well. We know Windows is a problem. We have issues in terms of Linux and with vulnerabilities. Well, does Windows have a lot of vulnerabilities? I mean, honestly, if you look at Windows, Windows has had a fairly good track record for remotely exploitable vulnerabilities for the past few years. I mean, you have like one or two for very specific service packs, and a lot of those vulnerabilities were patched before the exploit was actually released, and they're actually kind of buggy exploits as well. So is Windows bad? Is Linux good? No, it actually has nothing to do with the operating systems themselves, but it has absolutely everything to do with the systems administrator. Just because it's Linux, somebody can absolutely set up a really crap password for one of the users. Just because it's Linux, somebody can install a full PHP stack that is riddled with vulnerabilities and not patch it or update it. We gain access remotely to Linux computer systems just as much as we do on Windows computer systems. And the single differentiator is not the operating system, but the administrators and the support and the people monitoring it and taking care of it on the background as well. I got my CCNA about 5 minutes before the pandemic hit, and I'm looking for my first IT job. And my next cert that I would recommend if you're looking for security, go for the CISSP. It's relatively inexpensive and it opens more doors than just about any cert. CCNA, unfortunately, is still viewed as like an entry-level cert, even though it's a very solid networking cert. Not as good as like a CCIE, but it's really solid. You need to start coupling. Just couple your CCNA with a security cert like a CISSP. It'll help you get you in the door. Just getting it started. My manager is doing a great job getting me into training, finding as many webinars as I can. I'm slowly getting my feet under it. The problem is I'm not exactly a security person. My degree, my experience, and certs are all basic IT. How are some things that others like me to do to catch up? Well, look at it this way. You're further ahead than I was at your phase of the career. I graduated with a political science degree with a minor in sociology. So yeah, don't fret it. The best thing that you can do is be in the position of constantly feeling that you don't know what the hell you're doing and constantly trying to remediate that. So you're in the right place. So just keep going to webcasts, keep learning, do cyber ranges like Hack the Box or ACE-T or any of those, and just keep digging and you'll be fine. So the analogy I like to, I'd like to kind of use an analogy. So you always have this analogy of going and finding a guru at the top of a mountain, right? You go in to find the guru and you're going to learn from that guru. And my experience is it almost never works that way. So what happens is you're trying to go find the guru at the top of the mountain. You start climbing this mountain. As you're climbing the mountain, there's a whole bunch of people while you're climbing the mountain that help you. You help you get over ledges, help get through ravines, give you advice, all kinds of things. And what's going to happen is you're going to get to the top of that damn mountain, and the guru is not going to be there. And you're going to sit down and you're going to wait for that guru, and you're going to help the other people that are coming through climbing their own mountain as well while you're waiting for that guru. And ultimately what's going to happen is you're going to be that guru. And it's a very uncomfortable state whenever you actually get to the point where you're there. So be careful. Yeah, become the guru, right? If you want to know where I actually came up with that, I actually changed it a little bit. The first time that somebody ever told me that story, it was Henry Rollins. I don't know if you guys know of the band Black Flag, but Henry Rollins was good friends with a gentleman by the name of Joe Gordecki, who ran a coffee shop at Laramie, Wyoming, called the Provisional Cafe. And a little bit of background, Joe Gordecki ran SST Records for Black Flag whenever they were out on tour. So that's how he knew Henry Rollins. And Joe Gordecki was in Laramie, Wyoming, because he was writing a Western novel and he wanted to get a feel for what the West felt like. You don't get much more Western than Laramie, Wyoming. At any rate, he convinced Henry Rollins to come to the University of Wyoming and give a spoken word session. And he showed up, and I got to meet Henry Rollins, and talking with Henry Rollins just about all kinds of things. He asked me, what I did. I said I do sound engineering, and also I'm in a band, and trying to make things work. And he goes, how are things here in Laramie, Wyoming for the music scene? And it wasn't like a joking, condescending thing. And I'm like, man, the scene here sucks. There's like no place to play, and it's just really, really tough. And Rollins got really agitated, and he looked at me and he goes, F you, man. I'm like, what the hell? I just had Henry Rollins say F me. And that's like, wow. And he goes, you got to make your own effing scene. You see, you just can't expect people to just give it to you. You go and you start finding places to play and you get arrested. You play in alleyways, the cops show up, you get arrested. You go and you play in people's basement and you get arrested. He said arrested a lot, but the whole point was he basically said that you cannot wait for someone or people to make a scene for you, to write you a book. You got to go out and make your own thing. And that's been kind of one of those guiding principles of Black Hills Information Security, and even for like our training. We have all these people that are looking at our training and they're like, you could sell your training for like 10 to 15 to $20 million. And, you have all these people, you have like all these people on your mailing list, people who are attending your training, and they would kill it. So I wouldn't be making my own scene. And that's what we want to do, is make our own scene as well. How did Dave get the remediation done in 45 minutes and our team takes weeks? It just has to do with Dave is awesome. He's really cool. What do you recommend the next best certification, the CISSP to upper management roles? You shouldn't just jump into a director or a CISO role. You really should spend some time kind of doing through this. I guess CISO's a weird gig. It's like this strange club that once you're in, you're a G. Once you become a CISO, it's very easy to move around to get other CISO roles, but it's very difficult to get in first. So I will give you one piece of advice. You're never going to work up in the company that you're in as an analyst or even a senior security engineer and move into a CISO role. I have very rarely seen companies where the CISO comes and they promote from within. It has happened, but usually what it is, like, well, Don was a really great truck driver and we loved the guy, so we made him a CISO. So you really have to apply for these different positions. And I guess what I'm going to say is when you apply for positions, don't try to learn how to talk management speak, but understand that when managers are talking to you, they're looking for specific levers that they can pull. And you have to find a way to communicate security issues to managers in a way that they can understand it. So people will tell you, well, you got to dress a certain way. You got to wear a suit. You got to have a Rolex. You got to do this to talk to executives. You don't. You got to use certain words like leverage and synergy. You don't. Like, look, I have gone and I've presented to some of the most like some of the largest firms in the world, for like law firms, oil companies, some of the largest Fortune companies, in rooms with billionaires, and I presented in a t-shirt and jeans. And really what it boils down to is, can you speak authentically about security issues? And can you speak in such a way that they can understand? And that doesn't mean dumbing it down, because usually people are really smart. I hate it when people are like, this guy's dumb, this lady's dumb. That's a bunch of crap. Nobody's dumb. They're just exposed to different things. And I believe that. My grandmother, if you were talking computer security with my grandmother, you'd be like, well, clearly, when my grandmother was alive, she's dumb. No, she's amazing at like cross-stitching and knitting, and you may poo-poo that, but trust me, that crap is complicated and she's a genius. So they just have a different field of reference, right? So you've got to find a way to communicate that field of reference in something that actually matters to them and is effective for them to understand. And a lot of times that requires a lot of analogies. I still have friends to this day that are like CEOs that I will literally fly out and just have dinner with them. And the whole freaking dinner is them saying, hey, my security team said these things to me in an email. I don't know what's going on and I don't want to seem like an idiot to my team. So can you help me wade through this? So the tip is, if you're sitting down and you're talking to executives and your goal is to impress them, you have lost them already. If you sit down and you're like, well, I'm gonna show these guys how smart I am. Look at me, guys. You're done. If you sit down and you basically start talking about core concepts, you pause and ask questions and you say, does this make sense to everybody? Does anybody have any questions for me? I wanna make sure that this is sinking in. Give them an opportunity to ask you questions. You're gonna do great. So that's how you get into those roles usually. There isn't anyone else to blame. You're a CEO and they already think you're an idiot. You would be surprised. A lot of C-Os, they have a tremendous amount of imposter syndrome, just ungodly amounts of imposter syndrome. And I get this too, as the owner of like 3 companies. There's a lot I don't know, and I'm always worried that people are trying to put things over my head. So you're always scared. How should you dig deeper without having data to decide the detection rule? So what you do is you actually look at your detection rules and kind of pull out the actual event IDs that your detection rules are established. And then you're gonna have to do some SQL queries, McNulty, and you're gonna have to do a select count star from specific database on the specific column where these event IDs are actually utilized. And then you can get a much better understanding of it as well. This is Dunder Mifflin hiring. Everyone else here, been tasked with, you have to deploy our SIM, and make it repeatable and scalable. I'm a sysadmin cloud engineer moving slowly into security. I'd recommend, honestly, in the tasks that they've been giving you, I would recommend looking at the Elastic SIM, that you can actually have it up and running in like 5 minutes. And they charge you for it, but they manage and they update all of the Elastic SIM instances and they handle it all for you, and it is scalable and it's in the cloud. So it'll actually lend itself very well to your overall skill set as well. How valuable Darknet is in terms of making you a better security professional? I used to browse it a lot as an edgy teenager. I honestly, understanding what criminals do, most of what you're gonna see in the Darknet are skidiots. And they're really not that good. They just aren't. Really go to conferences, go to as many talks as you can in conferences. Don't get so shit-faced that you can't walk the next day at cons. Really try to learn from the conferences. And that's where the real brains of security are, and offensive and defensive. There's offensive people, but they're using the same techniques that we talk about in cons whenever we do defensive talks or forensics talks. Go to cons, start like becoming religious like consumer of that data, and you're going to do really well. I'm sorry about SOC 2 certification, Star Fox. I really feel uncomfortable about Star Fox. Star Fox's question for SOC 2. I'm sorry. SOC 2 is a completely different world of anything that even remotely relates to computer security. They ask about some security relevant things, but it's another certification is all. And I actually think it's less useful. A lot of people do it and it's required for a number of things, but if you actually look at what they're focusing on, not a hell of a lot. But you can actually go back to the Center for Internet Security spreadsheets that I gave you, focus on getting as far as you can, starting with these 11 things, and it's gonna help you get started with your SOC 2 certification as well. Been seeing many entry-level job postings asking for a CISSP. How do you recommend studying for the CISSP? Isn't there a requirement? If you look at, it's not IT, it's not 5 years security experience, it's 5 years experience in any of the CBK. So if you've been working with computers for 5 years and network for 5 years, and you have somebody that'll vouch for you, you're in, you're fine. So it's not security experience, it's relevant experience to the CBK. So networking and computer operations would qualify. So you should be just fine as well. Hack the Box versus real world pen testing, start and hack the box and work your way up as well. I prefer blue team over red team. That's perfectly normal. If you actually look at the way the industry is going, there's this pendulum that goes back and forth about every 5 years, where people are really into red team, and that's like the cool thing, and then it swings over, and then people are really into the blue team. And right now, the entire industry is really focused on blue teaming activities. And I've seen this over the years with Black Hills Information Security and our webcast attendance. If I do a webcast on red teaming now, I get like 1,700 people will register. If I do one that's really cool on blue teaming, we get over 3,000 people. So right now, blue team is where the hotness is as well. So it's very, very, very cool stuff. Sorry. I try to keep it PG-13. I slip up every once in a while. Thoughts on Security Plus? If you have somebody that's willing to pay for it and you want to go for it, you go for it. There's a lot of certs out there, Security Plus, CEH, and if somebody's willing to cover the costs, or if it's something that is accessible for you, do it. Absolutely, right? And even though I think CEH is garbage, it's going to help you get a job, and it's still better than no certifications as well. So you really have to go for as many opportunities that come for you as possible. And really, if you look at a lot of my certifications, okay, so my entire security career really took off when I was living in Denver. My wife and I were watching a lot of bad television, American Idol type crap. And I was spending a lot of time playing video games and playing rock and roll. Still don't regret rock and roll at all, but was playing video games and watching a lot of TV at night. And one night, my daughter was trying to get my attention, and I was kind of pushing her off, and she was like little baby. And then I noticed that she was on the other side of the room, and I caught her. I didn't catch her, but I saw her just as she went down on her hands. And I realized I missed my daughter's first steps because I was watching like Justin Guarini or something on American Idol. And basically that was at that point where I was like, screw this, I'm done. And we literally threw the television away. And I stopped playing video games, and I focused on getting security certifications. I got CISSP, GCFW, GCIH, and then I just kind of stopped. And I also got my master's degree in computer security. But I took that time that I was spending playing video games, and I took that time that I was spending watching TV, and I applied it to this craft, right? And that's really the genesis of kind of how I took off and how things really started working for me. Now, I don't expect you all to like do that all the way through, because anytime I tell you all like, hey, you should just stop playing video games, people get really bent out of shape. So how about this? Take a month, don't play video games. Don't watch movies on Netflix. 1 month, and do nothing but do cyber ranges, do nothing but trying to learn Metasploit, trying to learn ELK, watching webcasts and actually typing in the commands, getting your virtual machines up and running. And at the end, go back and start watching TV and video games. That's fine, but set aside a dedicated part of your life where you're gonna focus to this as a craft. And it's gonna help you just immensely in your career as well. You're describing this week, Wild West Hacking Fest work in GCIH as well. Do I have any student debt? Captain Lucasius, so fun fact, I was working at Northrop Grumman at the time. And when I joined Northrop Grumman, they had a policy of full education reimbursement. And I racked up something like $30,000 for my master's degree in less than a year. I actually finished my master's degree in a year from Denver University. And they basically reimbursed the entire thing. And then immediately right after they reimbursed the whole thing, they changed the policy to only like $5,000, $6,000 per year. So I was able to get through it without any debt at all. Where can a newbie like me go for safe homework on hacking and defending against? I know Hack This Site. So that's Ebenesium. That's what our cyber range is for. I know I'm kind of like selling my cyber range, but a lot of those challenges I've noticed in those cyber range are exactly what you said. It's like, well, VI escape, go. And you have OSCP, which is like, try harder. It's like, good God. We got to start somewhere. So we have a lot of challenges that are very basic entry-level challenges, and then they ratchet up from there. The other thing I would recommend is the holiday hack challenges. I was trying to bring it up yesterday and show you, but a lot of those challenges are really basic as well. 5,000 to 6,000. Yeah. A lot of those classes are really expensive. But you know, Hal, I know for a fact that SANS classes change people's lives. Like they are that good. And you know, it was just amazing for me in my career. I just couldn't travel anymore. But honestly, they're really expensive. If you can get someone else to pay for it, go for it. Why do I think CEH is garbage? So CEH isn't really, like, if you look at a lot of things, it's a very basic offensive cert. So that's why I say you should get it if you can, absolutely. But if somebody came up to me and like, stand back, I'm gonna pen test, I got my CEH, I'm like, oh no, put the keyboard down. If the only thing you know is the CEH, you really shouldn't be pen testing anything at all. You have great basic offensive skills, but you're missing a hell of a lot. If you go to OSCP, there's a lot of really great skills that you learn, but there's too much in the exploit dev side of the house. But all the other stuff, freaking golden, right? Just amazing stuff there in OSCP. So CEH is like pen testing with training wheels. It's a great entry level cert, but don't ever try to walk in. Actually, any cert you have, don't walk into a room and say, stand back, everyone. I have my CISP. Like that's not gonna get respect. There's no cert that people are going to be like, that person is terrifying. Well, that's not true. GSE in SANS, GX Certified Security Expert, someone walks in with one of those, that person needs to be reckoned with. They probably need to have their head checked. So background on the GSE. So to get your GSE, you have to have something like 5-6 SANS certs, so ka-ching. And then on top of that, you have to take the toughest exam that the SANS Institute could come up with. So they literally were like, here's a bunch of questions that scare SANS instructors, go. So GSEs are really terrifying. How does ACE-T work? So there's no applications and there's no levels, it's just points. So if you think of World of Warcraft, if you get into the game and you just start like just killing womp rats, right? You're gonna level up over the points that you get. And then you're gonna basically move up to like dire wolves and eventually you're slaying dragons. So the way that we set up ACE-T is the more points you accrue, the higher your level goes. And eventually we're gonna get enough challenges that we're gonna open up additional levels, much like World of Warcraft. So the more challenges you do, even if they're basic level challenges, and you just try to go through and womp every single easy challenge, you're gonna actually move up to like level 3 or 4 fairly quickly. So that's the way that we set it up. So you get those rewards very quickly when you're first getting started, but then as you get more and more difficult levels up, it gets harder and harder to attain those levels through the points. So think of it like that, and it works really well. Yeah, you can put it on your LinkedIn. I wish you would. Oh, great question, Samir. How about Microsoft Office? Hells to the yeah. If you look at pen testers, you've got to know Microsoft Word. You've got to be able to deal with templates. You've got to be comfortable with report writing, and you have to be really comfortable at putting malware in that crap. So yes, you have to be very comfortable with it as well. Yeah, it's meant to be like, think of ACE-T as like an on-ramp cert. Like if you wanted to go into a SANS cert, a lot of that is really high impact and high stress. You got to go into a certification room and you got to go through all this stuff, and that's just tough, right? So ACE-T is like an on-ramp that gets harder and harder and harder as you want to move into it as well. Yeah, level 7 and above gets pretty hard as well. And I need to be spending some more time on ACE-T. I haven't spent nearly as much time working on it as I should as well. When will the T's be dispatched? The training, I don't know. What is an on-ramp cert? So think of a highway, like an interstate, and you have like an on-ramp or a road that goes on to the interstate. So that's what I mean by an on-ramp cert. It's like an entry-level cert that really gets you going as well. But how have you found OSCP? Oh, no question, go with the OSCP. I'm gonna like thumbs up that. That's a great question. But OSCP. OSCP is the only cert that I know of where you have people that whenever they pass the exam, they'll like be in a room full of people and they'll be like, oh man, I just passed my OSCP last week. And people tear up and they hug each other Like that exam is straight up hard. It's a really hard certification and it means something to the people that get it. So SCP, but it's very more difficult to get into as well. What do I do to de-stress and be happy? I feed cows, goats, chickens, and pigs and do fence repair. It's funny, I had someone that came up to me once. I have scars up and down my arms from fencing for my whole life. And that's like fencing, pulling fence to keep cattle in. And I had someone come up to me and he's like, hey man, I really want to say you're brave for showing your arms. I'm like, I mean, come on. I mean, I don't have that much in the way of muscles, but geez, that's brutal. He's like, no, dude, all your scars. He's like, and he pulled up his sleeves and he's like, I cut myself too when I was young. And I'm like, oh, no. I never cut myself. This is like me as a kid growing up. So I have scars all up and down my arm pulling fence. And still to this day, I love fencing. Yes, my hands get bloody and my arms get tore up, but I absolutely love, pounding T-posts, the whole thing. That's one of my favorite things to do as well. All right. So was it Henry Rollins? No, it wasn't Henry Rollins. That was about the extent of my conversation with Henry Rollins. So there was a couple of other things. All right. So with that, it's time to get out of here, folks. So thank you so much. Let's go ahead and let's wrap today up. We're ready for tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be a pretty fun day. And once again, the recordings will be provided to everyone. So check it out. All right. So take care, everyone, and we will see you tomorrow.
All right. Have a good night, guys.
Bye, everybody.